This exciting story begins inside the online game, in the in-game Walbury Forest. One of the players was seriously injured and was now kneeling in the middle of this forest. He found himself completely surrounded, and his fallen comrades lay next to him. One of the men told his commander that despite everything that had happened, that man never showed up. He asked what they would do next, and the woman, looking at the wounded warrior, ordered the executioner to kill him. The executioner, without thinking, rushed forward to finish off the man. The wounded warrior turned around and prepared for the worst, but at that moment, as if from nowhere, a figure burst forth and intercepted the executioner's blow. When the others saw that it was Jason, they immediately perked up. However, one of the soldiers recognized him as Reincarnates and shouted for everyone to seize him. But Reincarnates heard the order and rushed into the attack with lightning speed. He did not hesitate to kill all the soldiers who intended to kill him. When they were defeated, he asked them if they seriously thought that by attacking in a crowd they could overcome him, since they were no match for him. It was Reincarnates. His real name was Jason. He belonged to the Mask of Haho Guild, and his nickname was Hero Killer. His friends began to apologize, claiming that it was all their fault because they did not immediately realize that the enemies would be lying in ambush. Reincarnates, however, put away his sword, making it clear that they did not need to apologize. He extended his hand to help them up and assured them that he was okay. The friends were touched that he had saved them again. But Reincarnates emphasized that what was happening was not really their fault. He looked at the woman sitting on the throne and added that it was her fault, a pathetic loser who could not fight due to lack of skill. He then turned to her darkly, asking if this was true, but the woman only smiled mysteriously. Rising from her chair, she noted that their friendship was truly touching, but still Reincarnates was too sentimental. She stated that even if the losers united, nothing would come of it. This girl was Seer. Her real name was Chelsea. She was a member of the Thunder Hunters and was known as the Thunder Queen. Reincarnates laughed and noted that her words sounded especially funny considering that it was those same non-entities who defeated her. Then Seer warned him that he should be more careful with his words. Otherwise she would make him regret what he said. Then Reincarnates took out the device and asked if she really intended to make him regret something. At that moment, he activated his inventory and donned his gear, completely transforming. Pointing his sword at his opponent, he made it clear that regrets were for weaklings like her. Enraged, Seer called him an insolent bastard and ordered her men to destroy him. Reincarnates only laughed and doubted that they had learned anything. But suddenly he felt a blade pierce his body. Turning around, he realized that it was not his enemies who had pierced him, but his own friends. The system immediately warned him that his health was rapidly declining, and his movements were limited. His so-called friend explained that they were forced to earn money and asked Reincarnates not to hate them for it. However, the hero still could not believe that he had been so brazenly betrayed. Seer burst into loud laughter and began to openly mock Reincarnates. He turned out to be a naive fool who believed in their friendship, as if it had any meaning where money was involved. Approaching him, Seer stated that she was going to remove him from the game. Moreover, if you kill him every time you enter, he won't even be able to make progress. Seer added that he was a player who was completely immersed in Warlord, but in real life, he was a nobody. However, now, after all his efforts, he has become trash again. In response, Reincarnates, maddened, dug his nails into the ground. He then rushed at her with a scream, ordering Seer to shut her filthy mouth. But a moment later, he was stopped again by his own comrades, who plunged their swords into him. Looking at this, Seer thanked them for it. Gathering his remaining strength, Reincarnates asked again why they had done this, since the guild meant everything to him. One of his friends, overcome with guilt, asked him to just die, and confessed that they had received several billion for his elimination. But even so, Reincarnates could not get rid of his disappointment, because he had done so much for his friends. Just recently, these people swore that they were one family. Now, looking at their greedy faces, he realized that it was all just an illusion. Soon the system notified him of the character's death, and that he was facing a 48-hour ban. Soon after, Jason woke up in the real world. He screamed in horror, realizing that he had lost everything. The game Warlord became a massive worldwide hit. It took over the world and brought in huge profits thanks to AI. This game became more than just a game for Jason. This game became the only thing he was good at, because in real life, everyone always considered him trash. He recalled how he met a friend who later betrayed him. That day, this guy seemed kind to him and even invited him to create a guild together. But now, returning to these memories, he felt furious again. Grabbing his shirt and hastily putting on his slippers, he ran out into the street, his thirst for revenge never leaving him. He called Donald and wondered if he understood what he had been through. Running along the streets, he did not notice the red traffic light. At that moment, a truck was approaching him at great speed. But the hero was immersed in thoughts that if he had known how it would all end, he would never have wasted time caring for others. Not noticing the approaching garbage truck, Jason didn't have time to dodge. The car hit him, throwing him to the ground with all its force. Lying on the asphalt in a pool of his own blood, He heard the voice of the answering machine informing him that the number he had dialed was unavailable. The only thought in Jason's head was that of all the possible outcomes, he ended up getting hit by a garbage truck. The images of his betrayed friend appeared before his eyes again. He also remembered the face of Seer, who removed him from the game. In the last moment before his death, he swore that he would take revenge at any cost. Then something strange happened. The system gave a message about the connection, and that the user identification was in progress. A few moments later, the hero opened his eyes and saw that a system greeting had appeared in front of him. Recap was even more shocked when he saw a huge monster in front of him and a task that required training. The hero tried to understand what was going on, but suddenly he heard someone call him a noob. Looking ahead, Recap noticed two guys shouting at him not to yawn, because they urgently needed to defeat the Minotaur. The creature meanwhile let out a deafening roar. One of the players exclaimed that it was impossible to complete this part alone. At least 3 people were needed to defeat the monster. Recap clarified whether the Minotaur was the tutorial boss that was removed from the game 5 years ago due to being too difficult. Hearing this, one of the guys was perplexed, because Warlord had only been released 10 months ago. These words completely confused Recap, but soon he, thinking about the release date, pretended to understand them. He crouched down, raised his sword and walked straight towards the Minotaur. The others called after him, asking where he was going, but Recap ignored them. Ready for battle, he charged straight at the boss. The other players looked at each other and decided that he had gone crazy. The Minotaur noticed the approaching enemy and prepared a powerful attack. However, Recap managed to dodge at the last moment. He increased his speed and delivered a furious blow that cut his opponent into pieces. Soon the remains of the Minotaur collapsed to the ground. At that moment, the players froze in shock, not believing their own eyes. But soon they looked at each other with sly smiles. Then they called out to Recap. One of them extended his hand to him, noting that he was indeed strong, and invited him to join their guild. However, for Recap, this offer became a painful reminder of the past, when his first friend invited him to the guild. The irritation flared in his chest again, and he declared that he had just made a decision. When the boys, laughing, asked what it was all about, they were overtaken by Recap's rage. He mercilessly destroyed them with a blow of his sword. In a rage, he said that if he ever trusted anyone again in this new life, he would consider himself a dog. Soon after, Jason returned to reality. When he opened his eyes, he was very surprised by his surroundings. The hero realized that he was in a huge V-Gear store, and there were a lot of people there besides him. He recalled that 5 years ago he didn't have the funds for his own VR device, and had to make do with a demo headset. This thought scared him even more, because it meant that he had actually gone back in time. Throwing his helmet aside, he decided there was no time to waste. Jason ran out of the store at full speed. He reflected on the fact that he now had knowledge of the future and all the skills he had developed. This meant that if used correctly, he had a chance to avenge his death. Without hesitation, he pulled out his credit card and asked the saleswoman to sell him the V-Gear device. The girl was surprised at first, but then replied that she would complete the purchase. Jason thought this was great and began to think about where to start his journey. However, soon the saleswoman called out to him in embarrassment and informed him that there were insufficient funds on the card. At that moment, Jason froze in a daze. Then he looked down and realized that it made perfect sense. After all, if he had money, he wouldn't have been sitting at the demo version. Panic gripped him. He wondered if he would have to earn money first, but he immediately rejected this thought. There was no time for that. At that moment, a familiar voice pulled him out of his thoughts, and Chelsea, known as the Thunder Queen Sire, appeared on the huge screen in front of him. On screen, she declared that the strong were never afraid of trials, because hesitation was a luxury unavailable on the battlefield. Sire called on everyone to become masters of war. Jason looked at the game's advertisement in horror, realizing that in front of him was the very woman who had taken everything from him. It came to mind how she had once mockingly called him trash. He turned away in a rage, deciding that he could no longer afford to pick on her. By the evening, the V-Gear device had already been installed in his house. The technician reported that the setup was complete, and the system was ready for use. Jason thanked him and looked at the business card in his hand, because he could only buy the device by borrowing money. He remembered going to the moneylender and asking for 10 million won. He agreed without hesitation. But then the man, placing Jason's hand on the table, suddenly took out a knife, and with a grim look, thrust it between his fingers. He made it clear to the hero that if the debt was not repaid, his life would turn into utter hell. Jason then said with some hesitation that he would cope and pay everything. But now, looking back, he decided it didn't matter. He was even ready to crawl through hell, just to achieve his goal and destroy the traitors. With the preparations complete, Jason loudly called out the launch command. The system responded immediately, notifying that user identification had begun. Recap thought that quite a while had passed since he had been here. The hero realized that a girl would appear soon, but he did not immediately remember her name. And at that moment, an entity in the form of a girl appeared before him, congratulating him on completing his training. She introduced herself as Ariadne and explained that she had come to help with class selection. Using her powers, she explained that one must choose a base class, the skills of which will determine one's class. Ariadne described 3 possible options. The warrior was a close combat fighter, suited to those who enjoyed dynamic combat. Hirkin was interested in this, but at the same time he understood that in a single-player game this class became too difficult, and therefore refused. Then Ariadne told about the cleric, a support class capable of healing and strengthening allies with magic. But the hero also resolutely refused this option, declaring that he did not intend to waste time helping others. There was one last choice left. Ariadne noted that all that remained was to hope that the game would be exciting enough for him. The system soon announced that the base class had been chosen, and that he would be teleported to his class's tower. When the hero arrived at the place, he was met by an old man sitting on a huge book. He greeted Hirkin as a young seeker of knowledge, and introduced himself as Golko, explaining that he would be his guide on the path of magic. After that, he asked what kind of magic he would like to study. Hircanus replied that he would like to master dark magic. For a moment there was silence in the room. The old man asked again if he really spoke about earth magic, but the hero clarified that he was talking specifically about dark magic. Shocked, Golko asked him how he knew about this art, since dark magic devoured the soul of the one who used it. Hircanus confidently stated that he knew about this, and was ready to risk everything. Golko trembled. He could not believe it, but said that he was ready to get down to business at once. After that he showed his true face, and in an instant from a kind old man he turned into a living skeleton. Golko laughed, admitting that he had not seen a young man ready to take this path for a long time. Having summoned a book of dark magic before the hero, he offered to place his hand on it. However, he warned him one last time that this road was too treacherous for the faint of heart. But Hircanus, without thinking, put his hand on the book. He emphasized with a firm look that his heart was far from weak. At that moment, black energy surrounded him. Then the skeleton laughed, feeling how power filled the body of the protagonist. He noticed that at last a truly interesting person had appeared. Then Gherkin remembered the legendary video from his past life. It showed a necromancer single-handedly defeating a raid boss. He realized that this was exactly the kind of power he needed. The system immediately announced that he had become a necromancer, and that he had also received a skeletal fragment. The hero was inspired and immediately decided to test his new skill. He threw the skull, shrouded in magical energy, to the ground. Then the system notified him that the skeletal warrior, infused with his magic, had begun to take form. Hircanus watched as his magic brought the creature to life. Soon the skeleton stood before him, and then the hero thought that this time he would become a necromancer. He turned around and noted that it was time to level up, since the training dungeon was supposed to be very close. However, when he looked at his skeleton, he noticed that its head had fallen off. They just stood there, looking at each other in silence. At that moment, a portal opened and the system reported that Hircan had entered the training dungeon for beginners. However, his mood was spoiled when he remembered how his skeleton lost its head from the slightest movement. The hero remembered that in his past life, such creatures looked much more reliable. He brought up the stats window and saw the description of the skeleton fragment skill. The hero wondered if he had overdone it with mana, and decided that he now urgently needed to gain levels. Suddenly he heard a noise and turned around sharply. As it turned out, a pack of coal wolves was approaching him. The hero was pleased and looked forward to the upcoming battle. These wolves were not considered the strongest, but their speed made them ideal opponents for testing skills. Hircanus then activated the skeleton fragment and ordered the skeleton to attack. The skeleton immediately appeared in front of him, and the system notified that the warrior had detected an enemy and taken a fighting stance. After this, the skeleton turned towards the animals and let out a loud, frightening roar. The wolves, seeing the creature, became slightly wary. However, Hircanus mentally ordered his subordinate to destroy them as quickly as possible. Hearing the order, the skeleton rushed to attack. The hero was delighted. Everything looked better than he expected. He decided that at this rate he would soon reach the maximum level. However, after the wolf's first blow, his skeleton was torn to shreds. What he saw caused Hircanus to feel genuine despair. The summoning skull fell right at his feet, and it seemed like tears were welling up in his eyes. This simultaneously angered and confused the protagonist. He brought up the system screen again, assuring her that this couldn't be the correct result, and demanded to see the skill details. Looking further at the description, he realized that he had probably forgotten to set the mode. Then he switched his skeleton into defense mode. But the result was the same. The wolves simply gnawed the bones of his warrior. Then he changed the setting to the third option, special action mode. But the skeleton only performed a dance in front of his enemies. Hircanus could not bear it, and almost in tears, admitted that he found himself in a hopeless situation. When he tried to delete the character, The system informed him that it was impossible. New accounts are not deleted for 3 months. Gherkin realized that he would not be able to delete his account or change his class, and besides, the loan payments were due to start in a month. The hero wondered why everything was falling apart, just when he thought he was finally moving forward. Looking at his useless skeleton, he desperately asked it to at least just stand still. He then wondered how that legendary necromancer from his past life had been able to endure so many battles. And then it suddenly dawned on him. Opening the stats window again, Reincarnates noticed that skills could be improved in battle. He remembered that during the battle with the coal wolves, his skeleton had been watching him, as if studying his movements. A smile appeared on Reincarnates' face, and then he threw a club to his servant. The hero said that he was lucky to be his servant, because he himself was once called a genius. However, in combat, as he emphasized, there was only one rule. With these words, he rushed forward and dealt a crushing blow, adding that if his skeleton did not dodge, it would die. The skeleton was thrown far back, but Reincarnates immediately ordered him to rise. The skeleton obeyed and soon stood before the hero again. Then everything repeated itself. Reincarnates struck blow after blow. The skeleton's body flew into the stone walls again and again. The hero shouted, demanding that his subordinate not stand there like an idiot, but learn to dodge and counterattack when the opportunity arose. The skeleton wiped his face and prepared for battle again. However, now the enemy is again the coal wolves. This time he managed to dodge their swift attack. He then countered right to the jaw and finished the lunge with a powerful spinning kick. This was enough to defeat all the coal wolves. After the victory, the skeleton turned to his master, but Reincarnates reminded him that he should not be distracted during the battle. However, deep down he chuckled and admitted that the last blow was actually pretty good. The system soon notified him that his proficiency in the bone shard skill had increased by several levels at once. Reincarnates smiled contentedly and noted that his conscript had done a great job and that they had both received a level up. Sometime later, the hero found himself in the starting village, Figus Castle. Reincarnates thought that his student was learning very quickly, and after a few more days of training he would be able to cope with the dungeons alone. Therefore, he believed that now was the decisive moment. First, he needed to reach the 10th level. Suddenly someone called out to the main character. A plump guy appeared in front of him, and asked him defiantly if he knew that after a collision, it was customary to apologize. Reincarnates ignored him, thinking that he had no time for such trifles. It would be easiest to just kill them and move on. The fat man had already swung, intending to hit him, indignant that the guy was ignoring him. However, suddenly a stranger appeared in front of him and intercepted his fist. The man said that you can't just attack people with your fists. The fat man, although he was unhappy, quickly calmed down, assuming that the man was in cahoots with this guy. Reincarnates went cold as he noticed his clothes and his powerful build. The man's name came to mind. His name was Matador Cheb. This is a legendary warrior from his past life. The protagonist felt a cold sweat break out on him, and he involuntarily shouted for the guy to wait. However, the fat man did not pay any attention to this, and spat on the ground next to the legendary warrior. He said that he had better keep away if he did not understand anything, since it was Reincarnates who had confronted him, and had not apologized. The fat man added that apparently Cheb had never heard the saying, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. At first Cheb didn't answer, but at that very second he released a monstrous aura. Reincarnates was amazed by the power he felt. Cheb's smile became truly creepy. Then he clarified that since he had already hit him on the palm, perhaps he should respond in kind. The fat man's comrade shouted, warning that Cheb Matador himself was standing before them. This was the leader of the Red Bulls Guild, one of the 30 strongest, a battle madman nicknamed a killer. The fat man asked his friend in horror what such a man was doing in this place. However, Cheb grabbed him by the shoulder and demanded to hear the answer from him. The guy turned around to look at him, his face distorted with fear. He then took off running with his friend, shouting apologies as he ran. Then Cheb laughed loudly, and remarked that he was glad that everything had been resolved peacefully. He patted Reincarnates on the shoulder and asked if everything was okay with him, advising him not to pay attention to such people. However, Reincarnates suddenly pulled away and threw his hand away. He coldly stated that next time he would not need anyone's help. The Matador was left confused, not understanding what had just happened. He thought the guy was acting rather cold. Reincarnates, walking away quickly, gloomily reflected on what had happened. The hero was momentarily completely overwhelmed by Cheb's power. Then, blazing with rage, he swore that the next time they met, he would no longer be the same person he was now. Later, when he found himself in the dungeon, he still thought about what had happened, and clearly understood the difference in strength. He knew that Sir and Cheb were at roughly the same level, meaning that in order to take revenge, he would have to reach the same level of power. While he was thinking, a huge black tiger suddenly pounced on him. However, before he could even intervene, he saw his skeleton warrior rush to defend his master. He destroyed the beast in an instant, pinning it to the ground with his sword. The system notified that the skeleton had killed the black tiger and received a level increase. Herkin wondered if it really took him 3 days to reach level 10. It was longer than he expected. His servant looked a little upset, but after some time, the system finally congratulated the master on reaching level 10. She reported that monsters would no longer appear in the training dungeon. The newbie mark had been removed, and the rewards were ready to be given out. He was reminded of his wristwatch, an important device with many functions, stats, missions, map, inventory, and messages. Gherkin noted that he hadn't used them for a long time and hurried to open the characteristics window. Looking at his stats, he thought his numbers left much to be desired. Then the system suggested distributing points. Hyrcanus thought that this was the first distribution, and there was no room for error. It would have been better for the necromancer to boost his intellect or magic, but he unexpectedly decided to put all his points into strength. At the same moment, the strength indicator increased by 50 units, reaching 53. The skeleton, watching all this, looked extremely disappointed. Seeing this, Hyrcanus asked him what was the matter. Then he explained that he had no intention of giving up necromancy. He explained that he did this for the sake of training his conscript. An increase in intelligence or magic would not have given a noticeable result now. However, his strength will allow him to teach the servant all the fighting techniques he has honed in the past. He admitted that he literally put his life on the line, relying on the skeleton to learn everything. But the hero ordered the skeleton not to soften, and to concentrate on training while he took care of the rest. Hyrcanus also added that there is a way to compensate for the missing characteristics. The next day he went to the Raiders Association, to the Figus Castle branch. There, the task distributor took out an item and loudly announced that new missions had arrived. The crowd of players immediately rushed forward. Hyrcanus reasoned that at this time of year the tasks were not so good, but people still rushed after them. When Hyrcanus approached the counter, he said that he would like to have one of them, and asked the old man to show him the list. The old man agreed, but warned that there were either too difficult assignments left, or assignments with low rewards. Looking through the list, Hyrcanus thought that most of the missions looked incredibly boring. However, one of them immediately caught his attention. When he chose her, he decided that this was his trump card. The quest involved exploring the cave on Mount Bhima, a fairly standard mission with low-level monsters. The old man frowned and asked if he was sure of his choice, since the reward was only 10 gold coins. Hyrcan thought it looked like a run-of-the-mill mission, but if he completed it to level 15, he could receive the title of Promising. Many players doubted the value of titles, but he knew for sure that they directly increased the character's stats. A player could be low-level with mediocre stats, but once he got this title, his stats would increase dramatically. In other words, this was Hyrcanus' first step towards starting his career. Turning around and leaving the quest guild, he thought it was time to get equipped. After some time, the hero arrived at Mount Bhima. However, Hyrcanus looked extremely dissatisfied, because he realized that he was dressed in a ridiculous outfit. The hero began to scold himself for his stupidity, asking himself what the hell he had done. It all happened because, having spent all the money on equipment for his skeleton, he only had enough for cheap clothes. However, he decided that it would be enough to quickly finish the task and then buy normal things. Deciding not to waste a second, the hero rushed straight into the forest to complete the mission as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, a bloody hand rose from the bushes. The wounded man called for help until he was dragged back into the bush. The 3 players who dragged him away just chuckled as they listened to the man scream in horror. Later, a warrior arrived at Mount Bhima and announced to everyone that the great adventure of the mighty multi was beginning. He was proud of reaching level 11 and thought that he could perhaps become a top player in record time. Suddenly he heard someone's desperate cry for help, someone begging to save a missing comrade. The warrior rushed to the source of the sound and asked what happened. The priest explained that they were attacked by a monster that appeared out of nowhere. In the end, they miraculously managed to survive. However, they ran out of healing potions. The warrior began to rummage through his device and said that he seemed to have some potions. The priest burst into tears of gratitude, but it all turned out to be a trap. While the warrior was distracted, another man struck him from behind. Having lost strength from bleeding, the warrior collapsed to the ground, not understanding what had happened. The priest, bending over him, thanked him again, but immediately made it clear that now he and his comrades would use his things. Realizing that he had been deceived by such pathetic people, the warrior became furious. The priest plunged the blade into his body and coldly added that it was all his own fault, since he had fallen for such a cheap trick. The system notified that player Multi had been eliminated and removed from the game. She also reported that his watch had been reset and now belonged to this group of players. They were members of the Ralph family, a notorious gang of gambler killers. Then the priest, hung with several hours, cast an ominous glance at his friends and ordered them to look for the next victim. At this time, in another part of the forest, the skeleton was preparing to fight the wolves. Without thinking twice, the monsters rushed at him. The hero snapped his fingers and switched his soldier into attack mode. The skeleton rushed into battle without the slightest delay and easily destroyed the enemies. The system announced that the skeleton warrior had killed an ancient wolf and received 375 experience points, then another 366 for the next one, and finally 379 for the last one. Watching the fight, Hyrcanus noted that since he had bought the skeleton a sword, he could now single-handedly deal with an entire pack of wolves. He was confident that he had done the right thing when he gave priority to his subordinates' equipment. The hero thought that real players care about performance, not appearance. The skeleton looked back at its owner and noticed his proud gaze, but he immediately waved it off. The hero stated that if his warrior was already finished with the wolves, then it was time to leave. He had to level up and get rid of this ridiculous costume. The skeleton immediately hurried after its owner. But at that moment, suddenly an arrow whistled through the air and pierced his skull. This stunned Hyrcanus, and he tried to understand where the shot came from. A man immediately approached him and began to apologize. It turned out that these were the same deceivers from the forest. The priest said that he confused his creature with a monster, and therefore shot. He continued to make excuses, insisting that he was sorry. Hyrcanus was about to forgive them, but he noticed a watch stained with blood on the priest's hand, as well as the sword of the slain warrior. He immediately realized that these were bad guys and began to pretend to believe them. He smiled and said that everything was fine, and asked if they had any mana potion. The priest replied that unfortunately they were not there, but they could help him level up, since mana was restored as the level increased. Hyrcanus pretended not to suspect anything and agreed. The priest assured him that they wanted to help, because they were to blame for what happened. Pointing at the monsters ahead, he called his group into battle. Then the three of them headed towards where the wolves were. On the way, he quietly asked if everyone knew the plan, and his accomplices answered in the affirmative. The warrior whispered that he would be the first to take on the aggressive monster. The mage said that he would then put an attack buff on them. They will then supposedly accidentally release the monster on the unsuspecting hero. They expected him to panic when he saw the beast rushing straight at him. However, their expectations were instantly shattered. They could not believe their eyes. As it turned out, the skeleton dealt with the creature with ease. Then Hyrcanus calmly stated that he was fine and suggested continuing. Players began to wonder what kind of creature he was wielding, and whether his level was higher than they thought. In this case, they decided to change the plan and began releasing several waves of monsters at once. They hoped to distract the hero while the warrior sneaked up behind him. As the warrior prepared to strike, he was sure that they had already won, so he brought his mace down straight on the protagonist without hesitation. However, at the moment he attacked, Hyrcanus easily dodged, which confused the enemy. Before he could react, the warrior received a crushing blow from the hero. The priest panicked and screamed in despair, trying to understand what was happening. Then Hyrcanus snapped his fingers and summoned his companion. The skeleton responded instantly, his eyes glowing blue. Then, without hesitation, he rushed together with his master to attack the bandits. They screamed in horror, begging to wait. However, they no longer had the slightest chance of defense. A coordinated attack from Hyrcan and his skeleton fell upon them, and soon their bodies fell to the ground. Coming closer to them, Hyrcanus made it clear that he knew such people very well. He reflected that such types usually gain trust only to betray and take the spoils. He admitted that if he had thought the same way as before, he himself might have fallen for this primitive deception. The priest cried out in despair, begging him to wait and just take everything he had. But Hyrcanus no longer trusted anyone and made it clear that it was too late, after which he mercilessly finished off the enemy. At that moment, the system announced that the player Ralph had been destroyed, and the 8 watches he was carrying had fallen to the ground. Seeing how many watches Ralph had, Hyrcanus felt very angry. This scoundrel turned out to be crazy. However, now he could get great benefit from the trophies. First of all, he was going to buy himself normal clothes. Turning around, the hero noticed that the skeleton was kicking the already defeated warrior. Then Hyrcanus turned to his companion and suggested that they take some of the trophies lying nearby. After this, he extended his hand and began to heal the wound left by the arrow that pierced the skeleton's skull. After a short time, the skeleton was completely restored. Hyrcanus noted with a smile that his companion looked truly pleased. He added thoughtfully that appearance didn't matter in the game, and true beauty was only revealed on the inside. At the same time, he himself stood in an awkward pose, and the skeleton stared at him in bewilderment. Hyrcanus meanwhile noted that the watch that fell from the priest was a real jackpot. He knew that the chance of getting rare items from someone else's watch was less than 1%, but luck was on his side. Among the trophies, there was also a huge amount of gold. Picking up the mask from the dropped inventory, he thought that thanks to these fools, the process went much faster than he expected. He decided that he would soon start recording his gaming adventures, and that he would need a style to do so. But, as he thought about it, he remembered something unpleasant. He remembered how in his past life, he had suggested to his friend that they give everyone in the guild a traditional haho mask. He was full of enthusiasm then, and said that the very next day they would rename the guild to Haho Mask. These memories suddenly darkened his mood, and he even considered changing his style completely. Hyrcanus swore that he would never again allow anyone to take away what was rightfully his. Filled with rage, he firmly declared to himself that he would prove he was right, and that was where his new story would begin. Putting on a sinister mask, he jumped up and called the skeleton to follow him. After some time, they found themselves in another dungeon. They passed through the portal together, and the system announced that Hyrcanus had entered the dungeon of the cave of Mount Bima. The hero carefully examined the marks on the stones and immediately remembered that it was in this place that blue werewolves lived. He knew that these monsters were dangerous, but with his new equipment, he believed that he could clear the dungeon in 10 minutes. So he ordered his companion to move forward. However, after a few hours he was in complete despair. Hyrcanus could not understand why monsters did not appear in the dungeon. After all, if someone had already cleared the dungeon, the system would have definitely sent a notification. Suddenly he saw something strange on the stones, and suddenly a dark energy of colossal power burst out of the stone wall. The system informed the hero that he had discovered an instance dungeon and asked if he wished to enter. Hyrcanus, astonished, fell to the ground and realized that this was why the monsters had not appeared. Instances would spawn randomly inside normal dungeons, and until they were completed, the normal dungeon would be locked. He knew very well that such places were much more difficult, but in return they gave double rewards. The hero remembered that once inside the instance, the player could not leave until he either completed the task or died. Getting up, he decided that it would be more logical to simply leave, since death meant the impossibility of playing for 2 whole days. It would have been much easier to farm easy quests, but he knew that this was something else. The system confirmed the entry, and Hyrcanus stepped into the portal and told himself that everything would be fine until he died. But at that very moment, a blinding light enveloped his face. Looking around, he wondered if he was in the Colosseum and felt the oppressive atmosphere. Suddenly, a powerful blow shook the earth. The next moment, a huge and sinister werewolf appeared in front of him. It was an infected werewolf of unknown level. The monster did not hesitate and immediately rushed to attack. Hyrcanus, who still had not fully understood what was happening, was unable to defend himself and crashed hard into the wall. The skeleton, seeing that his master was in trouble, became enraged and immediately took a fighting stance. However, Hyrcanus only laughed, calling his luck insane, because a corrupted monster appeared before him. He was sure that this could be part of the main task. Then he called his companion, and made it clear that if they did not defeat the werewolf, they could say goodbye to dinner. With these thoughts, he rushed into the attack. The skeleton, drawing his sword, prepared to follow him. He then placed the sword on the ground, allowing his master to use it as a support. Thanks to this, the hero was able to push off and jump straight at the infected werewolf. The creature let out a deafening howl. However, Hyrcanus used the curse remove skill. His blade was instantly filled with the energy of a demonic spell. The werewolf, not understanding what this man was planning, froze, looking at Hyrcanus in horror. Then in an instant he lost one arm. The monster screamed in pain, and the system notified that the protagonist's skill had been activated, and the target's stats had been reduced by 10%. As the beast howled in agony, Hyrcanus glanced at his blade, noting that for a first attempt the result was quite good. But the werewolf, emitting a bloody aura and completely maddened, rushed at him. At that moment, a message appeared warning that the werewolf had gone berserk and all effects placed on him were cancelled. Hyrcan prepared himself for the worst, mentally noting that this was what he expected from the dungeon boss. Then he smiled, deciding that now was the right time to try something he had been saving for later. Activating the inventory, he summoned a stream of dark energy. It completely engulfed his body and then exploded, releasing all its power. Then Hyrcanus emerged from the flash, dressed in battle armor, and laughingly asked where they had left off. This was a slot activation unique to Warlord. When activated, the slot would pass energy through the player's body, enhancing his characteristics and changing his appearance. However, the form always remained unpredictable and was different for everyone. That's why most players called this mode the ultimate ability. Then Hyrcanus summoned the infected werewolf to show him what he was capable of. The monster roared with rage and rushed at the hero. However, he dodged his blows without much difficulty. After a few maneuvers, he jumped back to buy time. However, the werewolf once again released a powerful attack. As he dodged, Hyrcanus thought that his opponent was clearly a boss. The beast's speed and strength confirmed it. He wondered how many more attacks he could withstand. As the werewolf went on the attack again, leaving many vulnerable spots, Hyrcanus noticed one of the openings. His sword, radiating energy, fell on his opponent, dealing a crushing blow, and the monster screamed in pain. Hyrcanus smiled, noting that it was moments like these that made the game truly exciting for him. But then the earth trembled under his feet. It turned out that the werewolf was still alive and attacked again. The hero sighed, realizing that the enemy was still in a state of rage and it was dangerous to relax. As the beast swung its claws, Reincarnates only smiled. He glanced to the side and wondered if his skeleton had forgotten something too. At that moment, the skeleton suddenly jumped on the werewolf. He dealt him a crushing blow and managed to cut off his second hand. Then Reincarnates ordered his servant that it was time to use the technique they had been practicing together. The werewolf was confused and lost the ability to resist. The combined attack of the master and his skeleton fell upon him so quickly that he did not have time to react. In an instant they dealt a multitude of blows, cutting the enemy into pieces. The system then announced that the infected werewolf had been defeated. Reincarnates turned off slot and noted with satisfaction that everything had not gone so badly. The system confirmed the completion of the Bima Mountain Cave mission, destroy the monsters, and awarded him 10 gold coins as a reward. In addition, the system announced that the skeleton warrior had defeated a high-level monster, and the bone shard skill had been upgraded to rank E. While the skeleton rejoiced at his victory, Reincarnates thoughtfully noted that the instance dungeons did indeed drop better rewards. The hero received the Necklace of the Infected Ranger, a unique story item that increased all stats by 18. Reincarnates was amazed by such a find. He understood that he would not be able to sell the necklace, but its value was higher than standard items. The surprise was heightened when he received 3 new titles at once. They were Promising Newcomer, Hero Aspirant, and Infected Ranger. The hero was surprised, deciding that perhaps this was the introductory title to the first chapter of the main storyline, The Infected Count. He knew well that the main quests were the foundation of the Warlord world, and represented the key storyline. And since the rewards for them were truly colossal, any player was eager to take part in them. The main quest was the heart of the game. Trembling with excitement, Reincarnates thought that even in his past life, he had barely reached the 4th chapter. He took what happened not as simple luck, but as a real jackpot, and decided to immediately leave the game. In the news, one of the players solemnly announced that the Hydra Guild had officially entered the final chapter of the Infected Count scenario. They intended to complete it within 3 months. But Jason paused the broadcast and felt deeply disappointed. What recently seemed like a jackpot in the game suddenly turned into nothing. He then became enraged and began banging his head on the table, realizing that the player and his guild were already in the final stages. Jason wondered if perhaps he had no choice but to step aside and wait for the next chapter. But soon a thought arose in his head. He hurried back to the computer, deciding that this might be his chance. The whole world was now watching the Infected Count scenario, and Warlord's first main storyline was coming to an end. He wondered if it would make a difference if he posted his video about the Infected Count right now. The hero suggested that it could go viral. Jason realized that he had done a good job recording everything that was happening. Now he needed to edit the recording and upload it to WTube. He realized that editing was the key moment and could only be entrusted to one person. A legendary figure from a past life surfaced in his memory. It was a girl, a famous editor named Romani. Seeing the hero's request, she wondered who this Reincarnates was. While checking the request, Romani wondered what a level 15 player could possibly achieve. She assumed that this was just the initial cave, and that it was just some rich newbie filming a video for social media. However, her gaze suddenly caught on one detail, and she remembered in amazement a certain person. The thought of who it could be filled her with genuine delight. Romani was a freelance video editor, and in-game she went by the nickname Hellmouth. Meanwhile, the story moves to the city center, dotted with skyscrapers. In one of them, a woman in a red suit was watching the news on her tablet. Her subordinate entered the room and asked if she had called him. She replied that a new video about the Infected Count had just appeared. She noted that she found this video quite interesting, because it showed a level 15 single-handedly defeating an infected werewolf. The man said that their team had also seen this player, but such monsters were too low level to waste energy on surveillance. However, the woman only smiled mysteriously and noted that she liked the video. After that, she ordered the hero from the recording to be brought to her. This girl was Chelsea. She was the head of the Thunder Group Corporation, the greatest business conglomerate. In the game Warlord, she was named Thunder Queen Sure. The next day, the main character looked at the screen of his phone in surprise. The video he posted the day before has already gained more than 6,000 views. It seemed strange and even awkward to him. In his past life, it had taken him months to achieve this result. Romani asked him if he had seen the number of views, and the hero suddenly realized that the situation had changed in another way as well. She wrote first, which she never usually did, as she had a reputation for being mysterious and unattainable. Moreover, she asked when he would send her the next video, and Jason admitted to himself that he had no idea what to do next. He understood that he would never find another monster like that infected werewolf. Therefore, he came to the conclusion that it would be better to return to recording videos only when he reached level 50. However, he still launched the VR device, started logging into the game and thought that he should strike while the iron was hot. Meanwhile, Cheb, known as the killer, was watching the video of the hero again. He noted that no matter how many times he watched it, the player's movements always looked impressive. But at some point he thought about it. The face and the way he moved seemed vaguely familiar to him, as if he had already seen this person. At that moment, a girl approached him. Yell, a member of the Red Bulls. Cheb explained that he was talking about Hirkan, the player wearing the Haho mask, and that he was currently one of the most discussed topics. Yell noted that if her friend had watched the video countless times, it was no wonder it seemed familiar to him. The blonde, filled with excitement, exclaimed, "Newcomers were always constrained, but this player acted completely differently." Yell, tired of his enthusiastic words, sharply shouted at him to shut up. Pushing him in the shoulder, she added that if he continued to talk nonsense, then at least let him go inside. There were only 5 minutes left before the broadcast. Cheb only smiled slyly in response, winked, and noted that he really liked her. Yell, crossing her arms over her chest and taking a deep breath, said that if this was true, then he should prove himself in the next stream. After all, more than 200,000 people bought tickets just for him. Soon the crowd was greeting the leader of the Red Bulls and the 9th-ranked warlord, Matador Cheba. When the broadcast began, all the guild members gathered at the dungeon portal. The portal to the dungeon was supposed to open soon. The countdown began, and the Matador moved forward, leading his soldiers. Cheb, pointing his blade forward, called on everyone to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, the story moves to the Figus Castle Raiders Association. There, Hircanus, with annoyance on his face, tried to comprehend what was happening. He was disappointed. There was not a single worthwhile mission on the list. It was to be expected, since this was a newbie village. But it struck him that there wasn't a single decent quest here. The hero even considered taking a break from recording the video. Suddenly, an old man approached him and recognized him as the same adventurer who had cleared the dungeon of Mount Bima. Hircanus remembered the old man who had introduced himself as Khotan the last time they had met. He asked to give him a little time and took the hero to a more secluded place. There he said that he had heard about everything that had happened, and knew that the adventurer had encountered a mutated creature in the cave. Hircanus was perplexed, because he did not remember any such task, and claimed that he had only seen a werewolf with strange eyes. Khotan chuckled and noted that this was exactly what he suspected. The monster was most likely infected with the power of the infected. Hircanus was skeptical about his words, thinking that the old man had lost his mind. He added that although he could not name a specific name, it was the hero's power that caused the monsters to go crazy, and many became its victims. For this reason, the association has offered a reward for their capture. However, before he could finish, Hircanus grabbed his hand, declaring that he would like to help in hunting this villain. The hero did this thinking that there was a hidden quest in front of him, and therefore he couldn't miss the chance. Khotan tried to explain that it was too early for him to take on such a challenge, but Hircanus insisted, assuring him that he could handle it. The old man, embarrassed by his pressure, finally agreed, promising to give him a chance depending on how well the hero showed himself. He mentioned that in Banzu Castle, east of Figus, there was someone named Ahimbri. Khotan continued, explaining that this man would be able to guide him and that he would write a letter of recommendation for the hero. Thus, a new quest, the teachings of Ahimbri, appeared, where the goal was to find Ahimbri and present the letter of Khotan, and the reward was a skill book. As he left the association, Hircanus could hardly contain his emotions. He didn't believe that everything that was happening was real. The hero wondered if he had really been given the task of becoming Ahimbri's apprentice. He was one of the 7 disciples of the great mage Bogan, and all the mages dreamed of meeting him for the sake of rare skill books. In other words, he was an incredibly important character in the game world. He happily rushed forward, thinking that this opportunity was most likely given to him thanks to his title and main mission. He figured that if everything went well, he wouldn't have to worry about video material anymore. However, he suddenly stopped, remembering that he had almost forgotten to do one important thing. He then headed into the forest, used the bone fragment skill, and summoned his companion. A skeleton appeared in front of him, and Hircanus realized that he still hadn't checked the rewards from the last battle. So he decided to start with a werewolf skull, which he never sold. The system asked him if he wanted to use the werewolf skull to empower the skeleton warrior, and Hircanus agreed. At that very moment, the system announced that the skeleton warrior had acquired werewolf traits and received 2 additional points to his stamina. Realizing that it was time to use the corrupted ranger's necklace, he put it on without hesitation. The system reported that the necklace's effect had been activated. All of the hero's stats had increased by 18. Hircanus felt that his preparations were complete and everything was going as it should. Then he took out 2 more bone fragments. The hero threw them to the ground, summoning 2 new skeleton warriors. The lead skeleton was confused when he saw 2 new skeletons behind him. Then Hyrcanus explained to him that now there would be 3 of them, and from now on they had to fight as one, so they should get along. Having gone deep into the forest with the new summons, the hero thought about what kind of monsters could live in the area. Meanwhile, the skeleton went berserk. He believed that he should be the master's only disciple. They didn't have to wait long. Soon they met a level 25 forest bear. The monster rushed to attack, forcing the hero to dodge. The blows of his powerful paws flew every now and then, literally a couple of centimeters from Hyrcan's head. But at some point the bear found a convenient moment and rushed forward with a roar. Hyrcanus panicked and thought that he wouldn't have time to dodge. However, he suddenly smiled, snapped his fingers, and noted that he had managed to attract the attention of the beast. One of his skeletons rushed at the enraged bear. But despite the element of surprise, he received a powerful blow and was thrown back, and several of his bones were cracked. An angry Hyrcanus wondered if his summoner had really thought such a predictable attack would work. He ordered to attack again, and then the second skeleton rushed to attack. But the hero again received the same result. The skeleton was thrown away. The hero finally lost his temper and started shouting, repeating that he needed to attack from the blind spot. When he noticed that the second skeleton had repeated the same mistake, his rage only increased. However, the third skeleton suddenly stepped forward and stood in an awkward pose. This made the owner smile. He thought that perhaps this one would show a better result. Then the skeleton jumped on the bear, preparing his sword to strike. It seemed that he would definitely succeed the third time. However, the monster easily swung its paw and threw him away, completely cutting off the skeleton's head. Hyrcanus nearly exploded with rage and disappointment, and in the end, he had to finish off the beast himself. After the victory, he wondered if his skeletons had any intelligence, as their behavior seemed senseless. He ordered them to collect their heads and return to the ranks. While they were messing around, he explained that the monster always turns towards the source of the attack, so you need to hit from the blind spot. He even drew a diagram on the ground, asking what would happen if they attacked straight from the front. The skeletons just twisted their faces as if they didn't understand anything. This drove Hyrcanus to despair, and he ordered to forget about everything. However, he admitted that there was progress. His skill rank had increased, and he could now summon 3 skeletons at once. However, there remained a serious problem. His calls could not fight together. They merely repeated each other's movements, but did not act as a team. This led to the fact that, despite the increased mana consumption, the effectiveness of the units became even worse. Hyrcanus thought about this, but then decided not to delve into it too deeply. He had already reached level 20, which was what he was aiming for, although he understood that he wouldn't be able to film combat videos anytime soon. So he stood up, ordered the skeletons to rise, and announced that they would now train on their way to Banzu Castle. He had originally expected that he would be able to sit on the sidelines, as befits a necromancer, leaving the fighting to the summons. But now it became clear that he would have to take part in the battles himself. Sometime later, he arrived at the Raiders Association branch in Banzu Castle. Inside, there were already a lot of players of different classes. Soon, one man came out of the room. The crowd immediately came to life, wanting to know what task he had received. They pounced on the poor guy, literally tearing him to pieces. At that moment, Hyrcanus entered, deciding that the people around him resembled a pack of hyenas. He covered his face and came to the conclusion that such people were found everywhere. They don't even try themselves. They just try to profit at someone else's expense. Suddenly, someone called out to him. One player asked if Hyrcanus had received a good task and offered to complete it together. But the hero didn't even bother explaining and rudely sent him away, heading upstairs. He thought that no one could know that he was carrying out Ahimbri's task. Upstairs, he handed over a letter of recommendation from Khotan. The caretaker checked the document, confirmed its authenticity, and politely asked to go to the second floor. Meanwhile, other players desperately tried to break through after him, claiming that they were in the same group as Hyrcanus. The hero himself wondered what kind of reward Ahimbri could give. He was sure that it should be special, because it was about a hidden quest. In addition, he hoped to build a long-term relationship with this NPC, entering the designated room and politely asking permission to enter. However, the hero was amazed by what he saw inside. The room was in chaos. There were books everywhere, so you couldn't even see the floor. A man appeared among the rubble and asked in surprise who Hyrcanus was, since he did not remember making an appointment. As it turned out, it was that same NPC named Ahimbri. Hyrcanus handed over a letter of recommendation, introduced himself, and explained that he had come on behalf of Khotan. Ahimbri glanced at the letter, noticed that Hyrcan was a novice dark mage, and concluded that he was quite skilled for his level. Then Ahimbri nodded and began to present the reward. After receiving the skill book Bone Armor and Helmet of Madness, Hyrcan realized that he had become the owner of 2 extremely rare skills. Having thanked Ahimbri for his generosity, he could not hide his happiness. But he declared that the conversation was over, and asked the hero to leave the room. The system immediately informed that the task of Ahimbri's teaching had been completed. and he also warned Hyrcanus to be careful on the way back. Hircan found this odd and asked the NPC to wait, wondering why the quest had ended so quickly. He wondered if a Himbri was going to give him another task, since he clearly hadn't come here for a couple of skill books. In desperation, he began calling loudly for the man, claiming that he was ready to do anything. The NPC then grabbed his hand and asked if he was really willing to fulfill any condition. When the hero nodded, a Himbri thanked him with a maniacal smile on his face. As a result, Hyrcanus received a new task, Egg from the Nest, which required him to get an egg from the nest, and there was no reward for the task. This left the hero in shock. He felt that he had been deceived by the NPC. Meanwhile, a knight was walking through the city, causing passers-by to become noticeably nervous. They began to guess that his equipment must be extremely expensive. The knight continued on his way to the Raiders Association branch. He thought that the Mask of Haho was there. Hyrcanus was very disappointed after leaving a Himbri's room. He began to suspect that NPCs might be deceiving players. He thought he would receive a quest related to the main storyline, but instead, he was faced with a mysterious quest with no reward. Still irritated, he wondered if it was worth doing at all. Suddenly, a strange man appeared right in front of him and asked about the details of the task. Soon, several players gathered around him, trying to find out what task Hyrcanus had received. He panicked when he remembered that he had forgotten about them. The hero thought for a moment whether he should just eliminate everyone. Suddenly, a knight appeared in the room, releasing energy and scattering the players to the sides. After this, he sank down right in front of Hyrcanus, who was lying on the floor. He asked the hero to give him some time to talk in a quieter place. Hyrcanus found this strange and did not understand who this man was who had appeared so suddenly. At first, he ordered the knight to retreat, but he approached and quietly addressed him, calling Hyrcanus the Mask of Haho and asking for his cooperation. This frightened the hero very much, because he had never heard anyone call him by this name. Soon after, they headed to a city alley. The knight apologized for the inconvenience caused. He then tapped his watch, explaining that it was impossible to have a normal conversation outside. After this, the knight appeared before the hero in his true form. It was a man with glasses. Hircan thought, judging by the equipment, the knight should be at least a ranked player, but he didn't recognize him. The knight asked if Hyrcanus was really the Mask of Haho, and the hero, starting to get nervous, decided to pretend to be a fool. He asked who Mask of Haho was, claiming that he had come just for a chat, but in reality he wanted to understand who he really was. The knight, a little irritated, asked if Hyrcanus had recently received a quest from an NPC named a Himbri. Hyrcanus then demanded an explanation, asking who he was and why he should share such information. Pretending to know nothing, he asked if he was picking a fight, knowing that he himself did not know who the man was. All he knew was that he had to keep pretending. He was curious what the mysterious stranger would do. The knight was silent for a moment, then extended his hand and admitted that he had made a mistake by apologizing. Then Hyrcanus sighed with relief, shook his hand and said that everything was fine. Then he turned around, intending to leave, showing that he would forgive this only once. The knight only silently watched him leave. At this time, another player, emerging from the shadows, informed his comrade that he doubted that Hyrcanus was the one they were looking for. The knight noted one thing: the hero was clearly not an experienced player. After all, if he had been playing Warlord for a long time, he wouldn't have so carelessly shown his wrist with a watch. Another player wondered if they should continue watching the Ahimbri NPC since the Infected Count quest was almost complete. The knight explained that the quest that Hircan received was the main story mission, so he couldn't take unnecessary risks. The magician agreed with him and decided to return to his place. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus, who had been watching their conversation from the window, quickly realized that there were actually two players there. He concluded that they were clearly from some organization, since they acted in a coordinated manner. However, he also thought that if it was an ordinary guild, they would have already made an offer after introducing themselves. This reinforced his opinion that these were unusual players who should not be underestimated. The next day, Hyrcanus was still puzzled by what had happened, suspecting that the mission was hiding something more. He assumed that these players had seen his video and knew in advance that Mask of Haho would receive the task, since they let him go so easily. That's why he believed that they didn't care who was really behind the nickname Mask Haho. The hero understood that if he continued the quest, he would encounter these players again. And to avoid the meeting, he will have to temporarily stop publishing videos. He wondered why these lunatics were always ruining his life, especially when he had enough problems with Chelsea. Meanwhile, Chelsea had just been knocked out of the game. Her secretary Penny entered the room, praising her hostess for the work she had done. She handed her a bottle of water and asked how the guild entry exam went. The woman picked up the bottle and declared that all the candidates were complete trash. She wondered how they could be so useless. She then asked if there was any news about the Mask Haho she had mentioned earlier. Penny hesitated a bit, but said that he seemed to have joined another guild, since he hadn't responded yet. This made Chelsea furious, and she demanded that the information be verified. A frightened Penny assured that she would look into the situation again, and would not return until she was sure that the information was accurate. While Chelsea was changing, she asked what the chairman had said. However, Penny replied that he had not said anything yet. Chelsea smiled and explained that if he was being quiet, it meant that Warlord was doing very well. After she got dressed, she pointed out that the hero tried to force the marriage when she told him about her experience in the game. Chelsea then ordered her assistant to gather a new batch of candidates and report back the results the next morning. Penny was surprised and asked if she really had to do it so soon since it was unexpected. But Chelsea ignored the secretary and walked out of the room, and then Penny thought that her boss had a terrible temper. Later, while in the dungeon, Hyrcanus noted that he had not been here for a long time. Now they came to the swamp with the lizards. He decided that since Ahimbri was currently in Banzu Castle, the quest must be somewhere nearby, considering it was related to finding the egg. By his logic, the egg could have belonged to some bird, reptile, or insect. Looking through the locations available to him at the current level, he realized that the swamp with the lizards was the only option. He called one of his subordinates and noted that the monsters here were high level, so he would have to use a boost. He knew he had to draw a mark and cast the appropriate spell. Activating the helmet, Hyrcanus watched as his subordinate creature began to change. His gaze was filled with bloody energy, and a powerful aura quickly spread around him, stunning the hero. He was extremely excited to see his subordinate being transformed into something incredible. Hyrcanus decided to test the power and ordered the creature to attack him. However, he forgot about the note in the skill that there was a chance of losing sanity. The creature took a deep breath, its eyes filled with bloodlust, and lunged at its master. Not expecting such a reaction, the hero was very scared. However, Hyrcanus landed a powerful blow to the creature's skull, sending it high into the air. When the skull landed with a thud, the hero demanded to know how he dared to attack him. He decided to take a closer look at the skill to check for bugs, but found nothing. Hyrcanus suggested that perhaps the skill had somehow not worked properly. While he was lost in thought, he didn't notice that a level 30 lizard had emerged from the swamp behind him, ready to attack. The hero turned and noted that it looked like the test targets had arrived just in time. He activated his skill again, and the system notified that when the Helmet of Madness was activated, the attributes of the subordinate creature would increase. Hyrcan also activated bone armor, equipping the skeleton with armor, although only the chest plate was currently available. All the skeletons were ready for battle. This even made the lizards a little wary, as they weren't expecting any resistance. Then Hyrcanus ordered his subordinates to destroy the monsters. The creatures unleashed a series of attacks, forcing the lizards to go on the defensive. One of them took advantage of the enemy's distraction and appeared behind him. After that, he dealt a powerful blow, destroying the lizards. The system soon announced that the skeleton warriors had killed 3 lizards, receiving 864 experience points, and the hero had risen 2 levels. Hyrcanus watched his subordinates and burst into laughter, full of delight. He informed the skeletons that they would spend the next week hunting monsters, while also searching for the egg. While Hyrcanus was praising his creatures, a woman was watching him from afar. Seeing the hero, she licked her lips predatorily. As it turned out, this girl's name was Ilya. She believed that her incomparable beauty was obvious to everyone. She didn't like to brag, but there was no point in denying it either. No matter what she did, everyone loved her. Life was always easy for her. When she was in trouble, her servants always came to her aid. But now, as she took a step, she slipped in the mud and fell face down into a puddle. Ilya felt disgusted and sickened by everything that was happening. She wanted to get away from this place. Annoyed, she remembered that one of her servants had brought her here to help her level up. However, the idiot died, and now she is stuck here. Watching the hero from a distance, she knew that the monsters were too strong and the terrain was difficult. Taking a closer look, she decided that perhaps she had found herself a new slave. Hyrcanus seemed like easy prey to her, and she decided to act. Suddenly, the hero heard a strange sound behind him. Turning around, he saw Ilya stumble and fall to the ground, begging for help. She pretended to be sick and claimed that she had injured her legs because of the monsters. However, in her heart, the two-faced girl hoped that the fool in front of her would be taken in and help the lady in trouble. But the hero paid no attention to this and simply continued on his way. This left her completely amazed. Ilya did not understand why he did this. While she was screaming for help, Hyrcanus thought that this girl reeked of big problems. Meanwhile, Ilya bit her lips in rage. She was furious, not understanding how he could ignore her. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus continued his journey, fighting several monsters along the way. He was starting to get bored watching his subordinates handle all the tasks themselves, and noticed that the same woman was still following him. He realized that he had been ignoring her to save time. However, she continued to follow him closely. Remembering the faces of his traitorous friends, he became angry, believing that if they were already in the game, then at least they should play fairly. Then Hyrcanus decided it was best to deal with it now, and he finally turned around and asked the woman what she wanted. Ilya said that she had dropped her sword in the swamp and asked for help in finding it. But Hyrcanus said that after that, it would be better for her to disappear from his sight. The woman was delighted and began to thank him without stopping, assuring him that she would not forget his help. However, deep down, Ilya thought that she had once again deceived another idiot. After a walk through the swamps, they finally found the sword they needed. Ilya again thanked the hero for his invaluable help. But he said that everything was fine, reminding her of his promise to disappear after finding the sword. He then took a deep breath and ordered his subordinates to take the sword, to which they quickly responded. Meanwhile, the woman laughed and thanked him once again. She thought to herself that necromancers were worthless without their subordinates. Then she took advantage of his inattention and tried to attack him. But when she was already close to success, Hyrcanus quickly turned around and said that she was too slow. While Ilya was still confused, trying to understand what had happened, the hero grabbed her by the clothes. After that, he swung and threw the girl high into the air. She ended up falling straight into the swamp. Immediately after this, Ilya emerged from the water and began to curse him. Furious, Ilya demanded to know if he really thought he could get away with it. Her fans would definitely find him and destroy him. But Hyrcanus laughed and said that she should look back. She turned around, not understanding what was there. Then the girl saw several lizards who were ready to attack her. While Ilya tried to defend herself as best she could, Hyrcanus made it clear that she was still far from being able to deceive him. He added that he saw her intentions from the very beginning. The hero thought to himself that he had been deceived too many times and could not afford to repeat it again. He turned around and reported that Ilya had already wasted too much of his time, then called the skeletons. However, Hyrcanus became angry when he noticed that his subordinates began to copy the flirtatious gestures they saw in the woman. He became angry and ordered them to stop learning strange things, or he would destroy them completely. At this point, a system message appeared stating that player Ilya had been eliminated. He remembered her cries about bodyguards, and decided that they probably didn't exist at all. He even suggested that someone like her couldn't have them. Meanwhile, a group of Ilya fans were watching Hyrcanus through a recording device. The guys were furious. Sometime later, still in the dungeon swamp, one player was injured. Hyrcanus, thrusting his sword into his shoulder, listened to the boy's speech about how he had come to fight the enemy of Lady Ilya. Then the hero wanted to find out why the player was going to such lengths for her. He himself had received nothing, and wanted to understand whether he thought that Ilya would meet with him for revenge. The player suddenly smiled. This behavior puzzled Hyrcanus. Then the player laughed ominously and shouted that he was doing this out of love for Ilya. Then Hyrcanus mercilessly destroyed him. It seemed to him that everything that was happening was some kind of stupid joke. Then he remembered the girl who had tried to deceive him earlier. This crazy woman tried so hard to scam him. In the end, she paid for it. He never thought that what she said about fans would be true. After all her words seemed like the whining of a cornered dog. But now he realized that because of this, he encountered crazy people like her every day. He was pleased, believing that his patience and readiness for the unexpected was due to the lack of missions. He felt it especially when these people appeared around him, trying to get him. Then the hero wondered whether it was worth finding that woman again and punishing her. However, he quickly decided that it was better not to do this, so as not to create new problems. The system then notified him of the receipt of another watch that did not belong to him. 5,000 gold coins, leather boots, and a promise necklace. Hyrcanus suggested that the necklace might be one of those super rare items that could sell for 800,000 units. He was delighted and exclaimed that love was wonderful, and thanks to this idiot, he would finally be able to have a luxurious dinner for himself. Suddenly, a man appeared from the forest, shouting that the hero was right in front of him. Hyrcanus turned around, excited, saying that he was the one who killed Ilya. However, he found himself face to face with several warriors. He started running away, not expecting there to be so many of them. The hero even turned around to count how many people there were. He refused to believe that so many people were obsessed with one woman. After some time, he decided to stop and called his subordinates. One of the players noted that these were the same skeletons they had heard about, and decided to let his friend deal with them. The player took a deep breath and used the power of love skill, easily cutting down all the skeletons. Then Hyrcanus realized that the opponents were above his level, and there were so many of them that it was impossible to fight them directly. Then he increased the speed of his movement and left them behind, swearing that as soon as he rose in level, he would find them and destroy them. After such an intense run, he stopped to catch his breath. He realized that getting rid of his pursuers was difficult due to his low level, and that he just needed to keep moving first. Suddenly he felt something strange in the air. Then the hero looked around, wondering where he was. Realizing that the place was very different from other locations, he realized that he had never seen such a black swamp before. After a little thought, he came to the conclusion that his guess was correct. Meanwhile, the players searched for Hyrcan, wondering where he could have gone. One player shouted that he might be ahead because he saw a skeleton. As it turned out, there were the main character's skeletons ahead, dancing as if in a club. The players were amazed by what they saw. The fat guy got angry. He cursed Hyrcanus and said that he had harmed Lady Ilia, and now he still dared to insult them. Without thinking, he rushed straight at the skeletons. But at that moment, a huge creature emerged from the swamp. Without thinking twice, it grabbed the player. The monster wrapped its tongue around him, pulling him into its huge mouth. His friends were dumbfounded with horror before this giant. It was a level 40 dragon lizard, the boss of the lizard swamp. Meanwhile, Hyrcan hid, watching as the players faced the boss. He never expected that the nest would turn out to be a lizard dragon's nest. He knew it was a boss with huge defense, HP, and attack, and it would require a group of 20 level 40 players to defeat it. He also remembered that, according to rumors, the raid on the dragon lizard had already been completed some time ago. Normally this boss shouldn't appear here. However, if someone with the appropriate quest enters the area, as in his case with the egg from the nest, the monster will respawn. In other words, since the dragon lizard is here, this must be the location of Ahimbri's quest. It made him wonder if Ahimbri had really sent him here to defeat this creature and take the egg. Then Hyrcanus became angry, considering the NPC a real swindler. But he also realized that he had luckily managed to gather good allies, and he decided that everything would be fine. One of Ilia's fans shouted that the dragon lizard was too strong and they should retreat. However, Hyrcanus appeared and declared that they could not do that. He used the skeleton fragment skill and summoned his warriors. Players observing Hyrcan's skeletons noticed that they were surrounded. One of them, shouting that everything was fine and they just needed to break through, suddenly received a blow from the lizard. As a result, he was thrown high into the air. Taking advantage of their distraction, Hyrcanus quickly ran away. He ran at full speed, mentally thanking those players and telling himself that he would never forget their sacrifice. He also thought that now that the boss was busy, it could only mean one thing. He can go straight to the lizard's nest to steal the egg, assuming it must be empty. Soon Hyrcanus reached the right place. Having landed in the nest, Hyrcanus was delighted, believing that all he had to do was take the egg and leave. However, he was amazed by what he saw there. To his great surprise, he did not find the egg. Hyrcanus began to search frantically until he finally found it and stared at it. It was a stone with a strange purple seal in the middle. He noticed that the object he found looked suspicious. Moreover, its shape is more reminiscent of a stone than an egg. He was then startled by a system notification that his skeleton warrior had been destroyed. Hyrcanus turned and assumed that the dragon lizard was returning after discovering the intruder. After some time, the boss returned to the nest. Hyrcanus tried to hide and realized that he was now completely in danger. He also realized that with the boss returning, he would no longer be able to explore the nest. However, looking at the egg-like object, he decided that since it was like that, he would have to take it, even if it wasn't actually an egg. Meanwhile, Ahimbri closely monitored the execution of the task. Returning to the place where the players fought the boss, he saw that their bodies were scattered across the swamp. Then Hyrcanus approached one of them, laughing. Taking the player's watch, he noted that the game warlord is really interesting. There are so many crazy people around because everyone has too much freedom. The player became angry and cursed him, but Hyrcanus put his sword to his face. When the player became frightened and fell silent, Hyrcanus told him to listen carefully. He explained that before this he was just playing, but now he has a lot at stake in this game. He made it clear that next time they would not get off so easily, and that this warning applied to them and that woman. Having said this, he turned around and ran at full speed. He used the bodies of Ilia's fans as islands to escape the swamp. After walking a little, he thought that if these players continued to pester him, even after the warning, a real war would start. He then decided to make some money by mining from the swamp. Hyrcanus decided to post information about a dragon found in a swamp on the game forum, and indicated that he would sell the exact location for 100,000 gold. Returning to where Ahimbri was, Hyrcanus placed what he took to be an egg on the table. He then awkwardly announced that he had brought what was requested. He hoped that this was indeed a useful item. He didn't want to search the entire map for that ill-fated egg again. By observing the item, the NPC made Hyrcan nervous. However, Ahimbri soon confirmed that this was exactly what he was looking for, thanking Hyrcanus. He was delighted, realizing that he had finally managed to bring the right item. Ahimbri noted that Hyrcanus had acted faster than expected, and thought that someone like him would take much longer. Hyrcanus was surprised by the NPC's behavior, but stated that he had done everything he could, and wanted to know if he was entitled to a new task. Then Ahimbri asked if Hyrcanus knew what this object was. He explained that during the exploration of the mutant area, they found this object, called the Stone of Infection. Hyrcanus was shocked, realizing that this was why those players were hunting him. The thing is, the Stone of Infection is an important starting item related to the main storyline. He realized that they just wanted to make sure that no one else got an item that could affect the progress of the main quest. At the time, he believed that he had been tricked into giving the quest, and did not expect that it would turn out to be part of the main story. Ahimbri then apologized, saying that he knew the task would be too difficult for Reincarnates. However, given the encounter with an unknown and powerful creature, he needed to test the hero's willpower. He asked seriously if Reincarnates was ready to fight the infection. Herkin clenched his fists, thinking that he had enough willpower, and if this was part of the main quest, this was a unique opportunity. Then he cried out that he swears this on his body and soul. But Ahimbri answered that he should not hurry. Ahimbri explained that Herkin had seen how strong the monsters were, and didn't think it was worth giving such a task to a newbie. The hero was shocked, doubting that his level was really too low to continue the quest. Suddenly, the NPC changed his expression, and said that if Reincarnates asked him to accept him as a student, he might agree to help and train him. Soon after this, Reincarnates left Ahimbri's room. Soon the system notified him of the completion of the quest egg from the nest, receiving the title of Ahimbri's apprentice and the beginning of the quest teachings of Ahimbri. Reincarnates remembered the miserable scene he had had to play out and became angry, considering Ahimbri to be a real swindler. Meanwhile, in one of the dungeons, the players destroyed a formidable monster. They shouted that the battle was over, and those who needed help should go to the healers. One of the players informed the captain that their guild had finally achieved something significant. The captain then ran to the other player, thanked him, and noted that he was stronger than expected. This player turned out to be a knight who was hunting Reincarnates. He replied that it was not a problem, and it was all thanks to the support of other players. But the guild captain insisted that this was not the case, stating that if it weren't for them, at least 5 members would have died. The captain then took out a bag of coins and said that was all they had to offer. The knight remarked that this was not the promised reward, and the captain sheepishly admitted it, adding that it was merely an extra charge. The knight, suddenly becoming serious, declared that he would not accept the reward, as he did not like to break the rules. This confused the guild captain and he apologized, believing that the knight was simply helping for the money. While the captain was wondering why the ranker was undertaking such a raid, the knight left, saying that he was going to take the items from the nest as promised. The captain tried to warn him that there was probably nothing valuable in the nest. Meanwhile, the knight thought that he was incredibly lucky, since he did not expect to receive the Stone of Infection. He remembered how excited he was when he heard that the swamp dragon had appeared, assuming that Haho's mask might already be able to complete the quest. But since the dragon was still alive, he concluded that the hero had probably failed. The player rushed into the nest and thought that defeating the boss was not something that could be achieved through game mechanics alone. He was delighted, realizing that now all he had to do was take the infection stone and prevent Haho's mask from completing the quest. However, disappointment overtook him when he realized that there was no infection stone. The knight trembled with rage and cursed Reincarnates, screaming at the top of his lungs. Meanwhile, Reincarnates himself exited the game and stared intently at his phone. He took a deep breath and thought that the moment had come to act. During those difficult days, he kept telling himself that if he could just hold out a little longer, everything would be fine. But now he was nervous and decided it was time to put an end to his doubts. Jason gathered his courage and decided that he would take action. Now he planned to order a steak. He had been skimping on food all this time, but now that the main quest was complete, he felt he could afford a steak. Moreover, he earned extra money. The hero considered it a well-deserved reward and decided to convert it into real money. As soon as he checked the account, he was delighted to see a large balance and thought that it was finally time for a steak. But then he noticed how money began to be written off from the balance, to pay off debts, utilities, and rent. The hero began to pound his fists on the floor, wondering why he worked so hard if he still ended up broke. Then he received a message from Romani asking if he was still alive, and if he had quit WTube for good. Then Jason picked up his phone and realized that he had forgotten to tell Romani about his situation, and that he would no longer be able to film because of the harassment. Suddenly the hero felt uneasy, and wondered whether he should be overly cautious if he was actually starving. He didn't understand what he did wrong. After all, he was just an ordinary player who enjoyed the game. Irritated, he stood up and decided that he would no longer worry about anything and would do as he saw fit. He then logged back into the game and headed towards an ominous area that looked like a cemetery. 3 of his skeleton warriors also arrived with him. The system notified that he had entered the Forest of Death territory. He told his subordinates that no matter how many times he came here, the place always evoked fear. The hero decided that this was probably the best place to level up his experience, and the dark atmosphere would also be good for attracting views. Then he turned around and ordered the skeletons to hunt. He also added that they now have a new partner who is responsible for strategy. His new warrior is a skeleton mage, a skill given to him by the cunning Ahimbri. He found it to be a great skill, although it did consume a lot of mana. Looking ahead, he noticed a hand emerging from the ground, and decided that this was their next target. Soon, several skeletons began to rise from the ground. All of them were level 33. This puzzled his skeletons, as the enemies looked exactly like themselves. Hyrcanus looked around and wanted to understand what his subordinates were doing, because they were supposed to be hunting monsters. However, it was clear that they were terrified of fighting copies of themselves. But Hyrcanus remained indifferent, confident that the skeletons would understand that the evil spirits were different from ordinary monsters. However, he saw that they were hiding out of fear and immediately asked what they were doing. Irritated, he snapped his fingers and ordered them to stop wasting his time, as there was a lot of work to be done. Then one of the skeletons rushed forward without hesitation. With one swift blow, he struck down the skeletal enemy. He watched as the enemy froze for a moment. However, he then began to move again, which left the skeleton puzzled. Hyrcanus noted that conventional attacks would not work. Then he took out a warhammer from his inventory, which added 35 to strength. With one simple blow, he completely destroyed the skeleton. He then delivered a blow to his skull, sending him flying, and considered it the perfect result. Turning around, the hero asked his subordinates if they saw what he had just done. They should have just been smashing skulls, but instead they trembled, afraid that he would do the same to them. Hyrcanus then explained that the goal was to destroy 100 skeletons in 100 minutes, as he was recording the video. The hero warned them that if they failed, he would leave them there to rot. These words immediately made the skeletons rush to hunt. Soon the system notified that Hyrcanus had destroyed several skeletons and had leveled up. He praised the skeletons and thought that they ended up doing better than expected, which gave Hyrcanus confidence in the success of the upcoming video. At that moment he felt a strange sensation, and then the ground began to shake under his feet. Soon, a massive level 35 skeleton warrior appeared in front of him. Hyrcan tensed, realizing that this was a rare monster that appeared randomly, and that it could be reborn in the future. However, the desire to eat was so strong that the hero could no longer distinguish where the skeletons were and where the cows were. So he ran towards the enemy at full speed with his subordinates towards the boss. In his mind, he was already imagining how he would enjoy the steak after his victory, wondering whether it would be fried or baked. But when he saw the skeleton warrior swing a huge axe, he had to jump back sharply. The impact was so strong that it left a huge dent in the stone wall. Retreating to his skeletons, Hyrcanus thought that it was terribly scary. He almost died without even having time to react. Luckily, he was the first to direct his blow at the monster's arm. The skeleton quickly struck back. However, Hyrcanus anticipated this, and together with his servants, struck the monster with a hammer, throwing it to the ground. Hyrcanus first checked to see if his skeletons were in order. He thought that everything went easier than expected. At first, the hero did not notice how the skeleton warrior rushed at him again. However, at the very last moment before the strike, he noted that the creature turned out to be very impatient. He then reported that one of his subordinates was still capable of delivering the final blow. The skeleton mage began to focus fire magic and released it, hitting the enemy on target and setting his bones on fire. The system notified that the hero had destroyed the skeleton warrior and received a large amount of experience. Hyrcanus took a deep breath, realizing that this was on the edge. Looking at the burning remains of the creature, he decided that the video should get at least 10,000 views. Despite this, he was still hungry and decided that he would definitely grill a steak. At that moment, the system reported that the location boss noticed the death of one of his subordinates, which confused Hyrcan a little. The system then continued to warn that the field boss had detected an intrusion, and finally, that it was awakening. A giant magic circle appeared next to them. Gradually a head emerged from it, then a body, and soon a colossal creature completely materialized before Hyrcanus. He was dumbfounded, not believing his eyes. A level 40 golden skeleton boss, the Golden Lich, appeared in front of him. He realized that this was the boss of the Forest of the Dead, and the first boss of the Mage class. He was also known as the Rookie Killer. Hyrcanus remembered that the condition for his appearance was defeating several skeletons, although he did not take this into account at the time. He understood that it was almost impossible to defeat the boss, but if he succeeded, it would be a huge win. He thought he might be able to cope if he strengthened his skeletons. But when he tried to call them into battle, they disappeared. The system notified that his skeletons had been scattered due to lack of mana, and Hyrcan was dumbfounded. He began to panic. Now he was all alone. But he soon realized that it was okay since he had summoned all four and forced the mage to use spells, so there was no mana left. Standing before the colossal creature, he realized that there was no other choice. Hyrcanus grabbed his watch and decided it was time to warm up his body for the first time in a long time. After that, the hero activated the slot with a sly grin. Soon he was in his battle armor. The hero stood facing the boss and challenged him. Without hesitation, he took the initiative and rushed into the attack. The Golden Lich quickly began to focus his skills. When he was ready, the boss released a powerful attack. This time Hyrcanus had to dodge the blow. He understood that even one shot would kill him. The boss continued to attack with multiple strikes, living up to his nickname, Rookie Killer. Hyrcanus realized that there was no chance of victory if he allowed the boss to cast spells freely. He jumped up, and at the moment of impact, he realized that the main thing was to prevent the boss from casting a spell. He delivered a powerful blow to one of the golden skeleton's palms, stopping its attack. At that moment, the Lich looked up and looked in horror at his destroyed seal. Hyrcanus noted that the boss's hands were connected to his spells. He quickly realized that all hands had to be destroyed. At this point, the boss started acting strange. The system notified that the boss was looking directly at Hyrcan, which confused him. The system then alerted him that his boss had analyzed him and was assessing his skill level. After making several hand gestures, the golden skeleton released a powerful wave of dark negative energy. Hyrcanus was frightened, not understanding what was happening. In the blink of an eye, he was struck by an attack of dark energy. While he was dodging, he tried to understand what was happening. At the last moment, Hyrcanus realized that he would not be able to dodge another attack. So he jumped to the side and the attack hit the ground, throwing him far across the area. Hyrcanus rolled somewhat awkwardly across the ground, but still managed to regain his balance. Lying on the ground, he caught his breath and thought about the boss's crazy attack pattern. He didn't remember it being like this before. He wondered what the catch was here. He wondered if the boss was hiding his abilities, or if he had been rebalanced in a patch, like the Minotaur in the tutorial mission. This thought saddened him, since he could not remember the details well. After all, years had passed since he had hunted the golden skeleton. Nevertheless, he grabbed the weapon and thought irritably about the difficulties of the situation. Looking at the creature in front of him, he wondered how he could defeat it. The boss attacked again, and Hyrcanus dodged again. He continued to do this with every attack. For now, this was the only thing he could do against the Golden Lich. As he approached the boss, he realized that he could dodge if he knew the trajectory of the attacks. However, this left him without the ability to counterattack. Hyrcanus realized that he urgently needed to find the blind spot. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. The skeleton boss grabbed him with one of his hands. Then he pulled it towards him and began to swing it over his head. After this, the Lich let out a powerful roar right in front of Hyrcan's face. At that moment, the hero thought that it was all over. As he watched the creature prepare its attack, he thought about the number of patterns. However, the hero then smiled, remembering that he had a trump card. Hyrcan used the demonic infection skill, placing a debuff on the boss. The system notified that the target's characteristics were reduced by 13%. Then the hero took advantage of the moment, broke free from the grip, and rushed at the boss. Hyrcanus admitted to himself that he did not know how the opportunity for a strike would open up, but the boss himself provided it. Then he concentrated his power into his fist. After this, the hero powerfully struck the golden skeleton right in the face. A powerful explosion accompanied the impact, and the bones of the skeleton cracked and broke. This spectacle delighted Hyrcanus. Gradually, the golden skeleton began to disappear. Soon the system reported that Hyrcan had defeated the golden skeleton, received experience, gold, the title of skeleton slayer, and increased his level. Finally, the hero breathed a deep sigh of relief. Having deactivated the slot, he thought it was a close call, and was sure he would have failed if the fight had lasted another 10 minutes. He opened the status screen and was happy to see that he had reached level 36, but also realized that things would get more dangerous from here. Even though 141 mana was enough considering the minimal investment, he knew it would still not be enough. Up until this point, Hyrcanus had been moving forward thanks to his titles and leveling up. But now, that wasn't enough. After all, he had increased the strength of his skeletal warriors. But what good was that if they disappeared at the most inopportune moment? He lowered his head and thought that he had already obtained all the mana-related titles that could be achieved at this stage. Suddenly he smiled and decided that he didn't care, and he didn't even think about it anymore. Hyrcan cast aside his doubts, deciding that for now he would send the video to Romani and focus on reaching level 40. Sometime later, after he sent the video he had shot from the dungeon to his editor, she watched it. At some point, Romani paused the video. Sitting at the table, the girl took a deep breath. After that, she hit her teddy bear with all her might, wondering if Hyrcanus had gone mad. But suddenly her mood changed. She began to jump around the room, admiring that Hyrcan managed to defeat a boss stronger than himself. Sitting back in her chair with relief, Romani noted that the video was so good that it required almost no editing. Then she thought about a title for the video. Romani wanted to come up with something cool, but suddenly decided to call him King of Solo Leveling. Later, the hero went to the Banzu Castle Raiders Association branch. There, Hyrcanus appeared to a Himbri, declaring that he had returned and become stronger, as the NPC had asked. The man noticed that Hyrcanus was all dirty, and asked what happened. But Hyrcanus laughed, and simply asked the NPC to give him the promised reward. A Himbri agreed, and said that the reward would be handed over. The system soon reported that Hyrcan had completed the quest, The Teachings of a Himbri, Part 2, and had received the Skeletonist skill book. Herkin was amazed by the rarity of the skill book, knowing that it was a unique necromancer skill that was not available on the market. He warmly thanked the NPC for such a great gift. Ahimbri also showed Hyrcanus that he had received the Ring of Contagion, and that to use it he had to use the Stone of Contagion. This ring is unique in the history of the game, giving 2 bonus points to class characteristics and 9 points to all attributes. When combined with the Infected Ranger's necklace, all attributes are increased by an additional 21 points. Herkin was overjoyed to realize that the ring would only be given to the first players to complete the main storyline. He jumped to grab the ring and began to thank the NPC. However, Ahimbri closed his hand and said that he was not sure he could just give it away. He turned away, leaving Hyrcanus puzzled. Then Ahimbri turned again, laughed, and said that if Hyrcanus wanted the ring, he should try to take it. Hyrcanus laughed, not understanding why there was such difficulty. However, he still activated the slot, put on his combat armor, and rushed at the man with full force. Eventually, Hyrcanus managed to get hold of the ring. He was exhausted and wondered what kind of crazy old man the NPC was. But in the end, Hyrcanus received the ring and the next quest. Ahimbri reported that he had lost contact with an agent named Mige, and suggested that Hyrcanus visit Zuru Castle. Remembering this, he decided not to take revenge on this guy for now. However, the hero understood that the area of Suryu Castle was high level, and that he should level up along the way. Then several messages appeared on his watch. Romani wrote that she had posted a video of a golden skeleton, and asked to take a look. Gherkin opened the video and immediately saw more than 2 million views and many comments with praise. Hyrcanus was horrified when he looked at his total earnings. The hero was shocked, not understanding what was happening. He fell to the ground and began counting the zeros in his account. In the end, he counted 8 zeros on his account. Soon the hero was drooling, thinking that he could now eat whatever he wanted. Then he remembered the jackpot he had just hit. He knew the reaction would be good, but not that good. Just when he thought it was time to exit the game, his watch alerted him to a new message. It was a message from the Thunder Hunters Guildmaster. They were officially inviting him to join the guild. Herkin was furious when he remembered that the Thunder Hunters were the Guild of Chelsea, the woman who had removed him from the game. He remembered how persistently they had tried to recruit him back then, and he was sure they were still doing the same thing. Furious, he brushed the message aside, deciding that he would never join the Thunder Hunters. After some thought, he remembered his past. He was just as angry that time when he received this invitation. Herkin wondered why Chelsea continued to insist, especially considering he was already in the guild. One of his friends noted that he was lucky, as Thunder Hunters is one of the best guilds among the top 30. The leader of the guild is the daughter of a wealthy family, so joining promised a high salary. Another guy added that this explained their interest in Hyrcanus, since he was really good at the game. In the end, friends said that Hyrcanus was too good for them. However, Hyrcanus took a deep breath and demanded that they stop discussing this. He made it clear that he didn't care about the high salary, and the money would come later, when his own guild became the strongest. Besides, he preferred to play with his current guild. His friend laughed falsely and agreed with him. After the hero remembered all this, he felt even more irritated. Hyrcanus still couldn't believe it was worth stabbing him in the back. He started slapping himself in the face, and thought that it was not yet time to get lost in the euphoria of money. He had too much work to do, so there was no point in rejoicing over small victories. Then he took out the skeleton fragments and threw them. A moment later, the fragments began to glow with a bright blue light. Soon his skeletons appeared before him. Then Hyrcanus said that it was he who did everything in the raid on the golden skeleton, and they did nothing. He explained that they would now start training again because they needed to be more coordinated and could not repeat past mistakes. He asked if they were ready for this. For a moment he saw his old friends in the faces of his skeletons, but quickly realizing that it was not them, he was delighted. Thinking that this time things would be different, he urged his minions to become the strongest. Hyrcanus then announced that their next target would be Suryu Castle. Then he asked if they would agree to train along the way. All of his skeletons nodded in agreement. After this, Hyrcanus summoned his weapon and explained that the training would be simple. They would have to run to Suryu Castle. Those who lag behind will be punished, so everyone ran at full speed, fearing the consequences. Meanwhile, Sira was sitting on the street and thinking about something of her own. A magician approached her and asked what she was thinking about. But his mistress, sitting on the carcasses of several defeated monsters, said nothing in response. Then the mage announced that the meeting would begin soon. It was Hatch from the Thunder Hunters Guild. Sire asked how the quest about the infection was going, but Hatch reported that they still hadn't found any leads for the next task. Sire was angry and couldn't believe that they let the Hydra Guild take the main quest before them. Hatch said they were going to meet with the leaders of all 30 major guilds, but Sire stressed that meeting such mediocrities would not bring any benefit. Despite this, Hatch asked the guild leader to be careful, after which the woman left. Soon the hero went to the moneylender from whom he borrowed money. As soon as he arrived, he threw down the bag with money. He stated that he would pay the entire debt with interest, which greatly surprised the merchant. Jason, looking at the stunned man, handed him the money and asked if everything was okay. Then the main character bought rare skill books, and it seemed like everything should have been fine. But when he returned to the game, he realized that he was again left without funds in his account. Reincarnates noted with regret that he thought he was ready, but seeing an empty bank account was painful. But he quickly decided to forget about it and focus on learning the new skills he had just acquired. The system notified him that he had acquired the skin grafting skill, which increased his defense by attaching monster remnants to his skin. Reincarnates decided to test the skill right away, and the system asked if he wanted to use the skeletal warrior's horns to enhance it. He agreed, and the system reported that he had received the essence of a skeletal warrior and 5 points of defense. After this, the hero looked at his hand. Soon a sword materialized right in his palm. With it, Reincarnates tested the skill by striking himself. He was pleased with the result, noting that everything was fine with him and the effect was better than expected. Then he moved on to the next book. The system notified him that he had acquired the Curse of Sloth skill, which allowed him to cast a spell that slowed down the movements of targets. Reincarnates found the skill interesting, looked at his subordinates, and tried it on them. He soon became convinced that he could be useful in battle. Finally, he opened the last book, and the system reported that he had obtained the Summon Golem skill. Reincarnates knew that this was the most difficult skill and the one he wanted the most. He immediately tried it out, which surprised even his skeletons. Smiling, he looked at the subordinate golem and noted that he could now summon it. He then exclaimed that a necromancer without golems was worth nothing. Judging by the size of the new entity, he realized that the golem was more reliable than any tank. Smiling, he snapped his fingers, activating the golem's passive copy mode. At that moment, the golem's eye lit up with a blue light. As it turned out, the hero created a connection with the creature. Reincarnates realized that the golem's movements were now synchronized with his own. By combining the golem's power with his own movements, he expected an extremely effective interaction. However, the golem simply stood there. This reaction shocked all the skeletons and infuriated Reincarnates. He even wondered if it was a bug. However, a moment later the golem copied his previous movements. However, the speed of his movements left much to be desired. The hero refused to believe that this was his maximum speed. Then he laughed and wondered what to do next. He had already managed to make grandiose plans, but this disgusting game destroyed everything. Meanwhile, a meeting began among the guild leaders. They all gathered around an oval table in the form of holographs. Elsewhere, Nergal, the leader of the Ares Guild, thanked everyone for being there despite being busy. Matador Cheb, leader of the Red Bulls Guild, laughed, noting that he recognized several familiar faces. Berg, the head of the Oskal Guild, only sighed deeply. Meanwhile, Sir, the leader of the Thunder Hunters Guild, remained silent. Berg wondered if all of the 29 invitees had arrived, as only 4 showed up for the meeting. Cheb laughed and noted that more people came than he expected, since they were talking about the top 30 guilds. Nergal pointed out that the meeting was sudden, and explained that usually the leaders of the top 30 warlike guilds compete with each other. He then took a serious tone and announced that the Hydra Guild had discovered the identity of the infected Count. Now they planned to carry out the final raid in a month. Cheb, hearing this, laughed, noting that this was crazy, because the other guilds did not even come close to Hydra's results. However, his speech was interrupted by a sharp blow on the table. Berg became furious, stating that it was all over if they allowed the Hydra Guild to obtain the infested Count. It will then completely monopolize all future major assignments, sponsors, advertising, and content. But Sire, answering him, ordered him to be silent. She made it clear to him that if he was afraid, he should just sit quietly and not disturb anyone. Berg took this extremely negatively, quickly took out his claws and asked if she wanted to fight. But Cheb asked everyone to calm down. Nergal agreed, and emphasized that the conflict between them would only benefit Hydra. He explained that this is why he is proposing an alliance against Hydra. The 4 guilds present must agree not to fight until the missions for the infested Count are completed, and to share all information. Cheb admitted that he was not a supporter of union schemes, but believed that there was no other way out. Having met no objections, Nergal ended the meeting, although Sira was still dissatisfied, but said nothing. Later, after the game, she headed to the shower. Chelsea found the meeting humiliating. They couldn't handle the first chapter boss alone, and were forced to team up with other guilds. She understood that there was nothing she could do yet. If Hydra got the infected Count first, it would be all over for them. So for now, all she could do was wait. Chelsea then ordered all guild members to keep an eye on Hydra and report any suspicious activity. She declared that the infected Count must be theirs at all costs. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to the game, to the Tsuryu Castle Raiders Association branch. Reincarnates was surprised and wanted to understand what was happening. He was informed that he had already been asked to go to the Bubaru Forest, where Agent Miggy had disappeared. He had to look for traces there. However, Hirkin noted that the Bobberu forest was teeming with level 70 monsters, and if he went there now, he could die instantly. The raider sighed and explained that this was why he was turning to Hircanus, Ahimbri's apprentice. He emphasized that if the hero refused, he would lose his status as a seeker of infection, which only increased his fear. After leaving the association, Hircanus sat down by the fountain. He began to reflect on his situation, realizing that he was in complete trouble. He opened the quest window and saw that he had to find the missing agent Miggy, who was investigating the infected stones. Hirkin was furious, realizing that losing his title as Seeker of Contagion would deprive him of his participation in the main quest. He realized that taking on all these high-level quests had backfired on him. Normally, he wouldn't have been able to complete them, but somehow he managed and moved on to the next stage. Moreover, he has now accepted a quest intended for players of level 60 and above. He found himself at a crossroads, wondering what to do. He couldn't give up on the main quest, but going into the Bobberu forest was also mortally dangerous. At that moment, he heard a player asking the mage if he thought the Hydra Guild would complete the main quest. The mage explained that the rest of the top 30 guilds hadn't even started the main quest yet. The player then asked what would happen to the other main quests if the infected count was defeated. Hircanus was frightened, but he quickly smiled, looked at his watch, and realized that perhaps he would not have to go to the Bobberu forest at all. Meanwhile, someone was watching the huge castle from afar and reported that nothing special had happened. The man said that their mission was almost complete, because sitting and watching the castle for hours every day was starting to drive him crazy. He asked his friend if he agreed with this, but when he received no answer, he called out to him, and his friend turned out to be Nathal, the 8th commander of the Hydra Guild. The guy wanted to know what the reward would be for defeating the infected count, and whether Hydra would become the strongest guild. But Nathal sternly replied that there was no point in getting ahead of themselves, and reminded them that their mission was to secretly observe the infected count's castle. They couldn't let their guard down and reveal information, because real professionals know how to stay calm. Suddenly, a player ran up to them and shouted that he had found Natal, which made him angry. The player turned out to be Kims, a third-rank player from the Red Bulls Guild, who smiled and said that it had been a long time. Nathal, shaking with rage, asked what a member of the Red Bulls was doing here. Kims explained that the boss on that mountain was a high-level one, and he came to defeat it, asking if that wasn't their task too. Nate looked at his friend, realizing that he couldn't reveal the true mission, and answered in the affirmative. Then Kims came over and asked why he looked like he really needed to go to the bathroom, which made Nathal even more angry. Kims turned around and said he was leaving, telling Nathal to go about his business, which made the redhead even more furious. Kims had already moved away, and Nathal was shouting at him to come back. After walking a little, Kims touched his watch and reported that the 8th Hydra commander was in place, and it seemed that the information received was correct. Cheb said it was impossible to believe that the anonymous source about the location of the infected count was accurate. Then Yell admitted that at first she thought it was a prank, but they still sent Kims just in case. She noted that they were given such important information too easily, and wondered about the motives. Then Kims intervened in their conversation, saying that they were in no position to find fault with this, since they had almost lost everything because of Hydra. He asked if he could start a fight to buy time, but Cheb forbade this, saying that it was better to retreat. If this is indeed the location of the infected count, most of Hydra's forces are there, and they can't afford to lose one of their best fighters. Kims was so distracted by the flattering words that he didn't notice someone jumping on him from above. The next moment, a powerful explosion occurred at the place where he stood. Cheb and Yell immediately became concerned for their friend. When the dust settled, Kims noticed a sword pointed right at his face, and realized they weren't the only ones who had gotten the tip. He laughed and noted that this was the crazy Chihuahua, or rather the princess from the Thunder Hunters Guild. Princess Haley immediately demanded that Kim tell everything he knew, or she would destroy him on the spot. Meanwhile, in the forest, a bear monster attacked the hero's golem. However, the golem successfully repelled the blows. Over time, the golem finally noticed the bear's weak spot and counterattacked. Meanwhile, the hero watched the fight. His skeletons, like moviegoers, munched popcorn and watched the action. Hircanus was puzzled. He checked the status and wondered why everything was so quiet. His letters were sent, and he should have received responses, but there were none. He realized that there was only one way to resolve the situation without going to the Bobberu forest. It was to force the completion of the mission. He knew that the main story of Warlord consisted of many chapters, and the current one was the first one, with the infested count. Once this boss is defeated, the chapter will end. Moreover, all related missions will also be closed automatically. The hero took a deep breath, realizing that even if he tried to defeat the infected count himself, he wouldn't make it in time. So he decided to move on to the next chapter using the remaining time. Hirkin began sending information about the boss to other guilds, hoping that someone would handle it, and was surprised that no one responded. At that moment, the system notified him that the Hydra Guild had started a live broadcast. Meanwhile, his golem was badly damaged in the battle. His arms were broken off, and now he had nothing to fight with. However, the giant bear did not stop attacking. Then Hyrcanus intervened and hit the bear on the head. He ordered him to calm down, explaining that he needed peace and quiet to follow the stream. As he sat down and began watching the broadcast, he heard the presenter greet the viewers. He reported that the Hydra Guild was the first to discover the identity of the infected Count and was planning to conduct a raid. The date for the raid had already been set. The hero really hoped that this would happen within a month. However, everything was better than he thought. The raid was supposed to take place in 3 days. The stream ended soon after, and Hyrcan noted that the date came earlier than he expected. But that was predictable. He laughed, thinking that everything was going perfectly, and ordered the golem to continue the fight with the bear. While watching the battle, he noted that the Hydra Guild was probably worried since he had spread the information to the other guilds. He knew that if it really was Hydra, there was no need to worry. They were significantly ahead of the other guilds in terms of progress in the main quest. The hero came to the conclusion that after completing the mission, his main enemy would disappear, and in 3 days his happy life would begin. 3 days passed, and the system reported that all members of the Hydra Guild had died in the raid, and the mission had failed. Jason was completely confused. In irritation, he threw the phone on the ground. Jason was outraged, wondering why the raid had started so early without a plan. He wondered if he had overestimated the Hydra Guild, and whether he should look for alternatives. He soon noticed that the Red Bulls Guild had begun their broadcast. He grabbed the phone and wondered if Cheb, known as the Killer, was from there. In-game, Cheb commented that the location was resetting, and he assumed that the Hydra raid had failed. He asked the soldiers if they saw what happened. He explained that the infected Count was a powerful enemy, capable of destroying even Hydra, and the lack of supplies reduced the chances of success. However, Cheb slammed his sword into the ground, making it clear that the Red Bulls Guild accepted the challenge. The soldiers shouted that they were ready for the upcoming battle. Jason wondered if the Red Bulls would actually start a quest with the infected Count, since even their skill was not enough. He was then surprised to hear that another player would be joining the raid. Soon a woman in heels came out to the Red Bulls Guild. As it turned out, it was the guildmaster of the Thunder Hunters, Queen of Thunder Sura. This confused Hyrcanus. It took him a few moments to realize they were talking about Chelsea. Previously, both guildmasters met at the Red Bulls camp. Cheb noted that the meeting with the Queen of Thunder was unexpected, and wanted to understand if she was declaring war. He would never have thought that she herself would seek a meeting with him. Sura explained that for now they remain allies. Then Cheb noticed that one of his men had been beaten. However, Sura said that it was nothing, just their way of greeting strangers. Then she focused and decided to get down to business. The girl noted that she heard that he had information about the infected Count. Cheb tried to play dumb, but Sura said there was no time for games. She found out that some members of the top 30 guilds had received information about the infected Count. Anyone would have noticed that someone like Cheb would suddenly start to act. Cheb laughed, admitting that she had caught him, but no one knew who had given the clue. Then Sire smiled sinisterly and asked if he really thought Hydra would succeed. However, Cheb responded that he was unsure, and Sira noted that the Hydra Guild would fail, as they had moved the raid date to be first. However, the infected Count is the first boss, and it would be more beneficial for them to have the others act first to gather information. Cheb became serious and asked what her real goal was. In response, Sire smiled slightly. However, she then suddenly slammed her sword down on the table, surprising even the leader of the Red Bulls. Kims prepared himself for the worst, but Cheb motioned for him to remain calm. Sire then offered to cooperate in the raid on the infected Count, and promised to let Cheb strike the first blow. Cheb was surprised, thinking she was bluffing, but now he realized that it was expected. Watching her fight and kill raid monsters, he realized that she wasn't just bragging. Still, he understood that the infected Count was no easy opponent. The Count himself, laughing arrogantly, noted that he was not even hurt, and immediately ordered his creatures to attack without stopping. Thus began a fierce battle between the infected Count and the two guilds. The battle dragged on, and Cheb noticed that the allied forces were gradually beginning to wear out. Sire, watching the enemy tensely, noted that more and more monsters were arriving. Then Cheb took a step forward, releasing his terrifying power. He shouted to the Thunder Queen that he would clear the way for her. Then he launched a powerful blow forward, and she rushed after him. Cheb's powerful attack was aimed straight at the infected Earl, with the Thunder Queen flying right behind him. The boss became furious and counterattacked, asking how they dared challenge him. Siri tried her best to dodge the countless attacks. Then she jumped into the air. The girl was confident as she prepared to strike. But suddenly something touched her, and horror appeared on Siri's face. It turned out that the infected Count was directing his attacks into the ground, so that they would pop up behind her and catch her in mid-air. Cheb, alarmed, shouted, trying to find out if she was okay. However, Surrey took a deep breath and smiled slightly. She then launched a series of attacks and escaped from his clutches. After this, Surrey rushed towards the infected count. With full confidence in her eyes, she managed to deliver a powerful blow to the boss. She cut the infected count's body in half with her sword. Cheb breathed a sigh of relief and admitted that she was scarier than he expected. Surrey then saw a system message that the Red Bull and Thunder Hunter guilds had defeated the boss. The protagonist was stunned to learn that Chelsea had defeated the boss of the first chapter. He threw the phone on the ground and muttered that it didn't matter. He just needed the count to be defeated, no matter by whom. He hoped that Surrey would enjoy her victory while she could, because it would be her last. In the end, he knew that he would be the one who would win in the end. After some time, in the dungeons of the Balkas Mountains, the main character was with his skeletons. He reflected on how he was a chieftain player who was somehow reborn and dreamed of becoming the strongest in the game. While thinking about this, he suddenly heard a deafening noise around him. Before he had time to understand what was happening, a herd of wild boars was already rushing straight towards him, and Hyrcanus was forced to flee. A few hours ago he approached the entrance to the Balkas Mountains. However, the hero saw that the field was blocked. The skeleton was confused, but Hyrcanus explained that the field was closed until a certain condition was met, which he had not yet achieved. Entry was restricted at the moment. However, he understood that the Balkas Mountains were the main scene of the second chapter of the storyline. After completing the main quest of the first chapter, the entrance opens automatically. When Hyrcanus crossed the barrier, the system notified him that he had entered the Balkas Mountains and was given the title of Pioneer of the Year of Balkas. The hero was delighted, thinking that no one had yet discovered this place. He called his minions and declared that it was his time to shine. But immediately he encountered several monsters. These were level 60 wild boars, ferocious creatures that banded together in packs. Hyrcan, being only level 41, was shocked when he met them right away. In the present time, the boars were furious and rushed after the main character, while Hyrcanus continued to run, amazed at his bad luck. He realized that someone had probably already noticed that the blocked field had opened, and there was no time to waste. The chances were low, but the attempt was still mandatory. He then shouted to his minions to activate their helmets and attack the boars. However, the creatures proved too strong and easily destroyed his skeletons. As he retreated, the hero saw that all of his skeletons had died with one blow. But the protagonist just smiled, considering it a bait. He activated the laziness curse skill on the wild boars. Approaching them, he informed them that they would not be able to move for some time. Then taking his sword, he rushed into battle. Hyrcanus was going to take revenge for the destruction of his skeletons. However, suddenly he stepped on a banana peel and fell right in front of the animals. After this, another skin fell on his head. Hyrcanus became furious, trying to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, a level 50 armored monkey, known for bullying people, was sitting on a tree branch. Hyrcanus got angry and told the monkey to wait, because it was going to be punished. But at that moment the system notified him that the debuff effect had passed. He turned around in panic, realizing that the situation had become critical. Suddenly a bright flash blinded him, and the head of one of the boars was completely destroyed. Hyrcanus was stunned, trying to understand what had happened. There was someone in the tree shooting a crossbow. The stranger fired a multitude of arrows, which destroyed several boars in the blink of an eye. The protagonist was amazed at how easily the monsters were defeated, and wondered how this was possible with just one shot. Then the mysterious figure approached and asked if the hero was hurt. Hyrcanus turned and saw the man, wondering if this was the man he thought he was. Meanwhile, the story moves to Zuryu Castle. The two raiders there were surprised by what they saw. One of them noticed a knight leaning against the wall and asked if this was the White Mamba's armor. The other nodded and asked if this was a rancor. The knight, visibly irritated, adjusted his glasses and asked if his partner had discovered the informant's identity. At that moment, the mage who appeared from the shadows said that none of the guilds knew who provided the information, which, however, was logical. After all, we were talking about a person who knew the Count's identity and shared the information for free. It's impossible to find someone like that. The knight wanted to know if his friend had any news about the Mask of Haho, and the mage replied that Toti was just posting regular hunting videos. The mage continued by saying that it was impossible for a newbie who had just started the main storyline to be involved in all of this. He then asked where the knight's next mission would be, and the knight informed him that it would be at the Cleansing Guild. The knight assured him that he would cope with the assistant's task, and asked his friend to focus on finding the one who leaked the information. He stressed that the identity of the man was unknown, but vowed to make him pay for upsetting the balance of the world. Later, the story moves to a humble hut in the Balkas Mountains. There, the old man who saved the main character from the boars asked if he really was a student of the magician Ahimbri. Encouraged, Hyrcan confirmed this and thought about how lucky he was to meet Mavun, the main NPC from the Chapter 2 storyline. The old man said that he was lucky to spot the hero in time when he was patrolling the area. Hyrcanus knew that Mavun was skilled enough to have once been a fencing instructor to the prince, but due to an accident he was expelled, after which he became the captain of the guards guarding the Balkis Mountains. Therefore, Hyrcanus was sure that he should meet this NPC in the second chapter, and felt incredibly lucky. Then Mavun admitted that he did not know what brought Hyrcanus here, but there was nothing in this place except monsters, so he urged him to return before something more serious happened. Then Hyrcanus, smiling, announced that the infected count was dead. He thought that there was no point in waiting for the old man to explain, since he already knew how to get to the second chapter. At the same time, Hyrcanus added that even after defeating the count, there were still infected monsters, and by tracking the source, he ended up here. Mavun said that he had some guesses, but no proof yet, so he asked the hero to help gather information. Suddenly, the system notified that Hyrcanus had received the title of First to Meet the Ranger of the Balkis Mountains, and the title of Initiator. Having received two rare titles at once, Hyrcanus was delighted and assured the old man that he could really help. Thus, a quest was created from Ranger Mavun, according to which Hyrcan had to defeat 50 monsters in the Balkis Mountains. Without wasting any time, Hyrcanus left the hut. He thought everything was going perfectly since he still needed to level up. He decided to attack the lighter monsters first, leaving the strong ones like the wild boars and warbears. Remembering how the armored monkey had teased him, he decided to start with her. Now the hero was thinking about how to make her pay for his ridicule. Later, still in the dungeons of the Balkis Mountains, one player slipped on a banana peel, followed by another. This went on for some time, and the monkey just sat on the branch and laughed. Then another player appeared. The monkey immediately focused its attention on him, preparing to attack. At that moment, Hyrcanus suddenly appeared behind the monster and announced that he had finally found him. The monkey turned awkwardly and looked at the player. Then the main character, with a terrifying expression on his face, declared that he intended to destroy her. Without hesitation, he grabbed the sword and rushed at the monster. But the monkey easily dodged all attacks. Hyrcanus tried everything to strike, but the monkey always dodged him. Then the monster suddenly increased its speed and quickly ran away. The hero chased after it in rage. As he walked, he thought about how annoying it was that the monkey was so fast, and how the trees were hindering the attack. Stopping on a branch, he prepared for a different tactic. The hero then threw his sword to hit the monster. He noticed the attack and was very scared. Hyrcanus' sword hit a tree near the monkey, frightening it even more. The weapon was literally a couple of centimeters from his body. The monster began to laugh, but Hyrcanus explained that the sword throw was only a distraction. At that moment, a golem appeared behind the monkey. With one powerful blow, he inflicted devastating damage. Hyrcanus watched from afar, and the system soon notified him that he had earned the title of First to defeat the armored ape and destroy it. Meanwhile, the defeated monster lay somewhere below. The hero was delighted and decided that it was time to start hunting the rest. Meanwhile, several cameras were filming the momentous event, but Cheb and Sire took the stage as the victors of the raid. Everyone around congratulated the Red Bulls and Thunder Hunters Guild on successfully completing the raid on the boss of the first chapter. The reporter approached the Queen of Thunder and asked if she had anything to say. She just smiled slightly and said that they were lucky this time, but they would continue to try for future success. Outside the camera, however, Sire looked unhappy. Haley, who was walking with her, noted that she was the best. She thought all was lost when the last wave of monsters appeared. But then Sire intervened and single-handedly defeated the infected count. However, Sire emphasized that they were lucky and that they could not have managed without the Red Bulls. She knew that to achieve complete victory, they needed the skills of one player. She was referring to a player named Maska Haho. Frustrated, she asked Haley to call Hutch, and the girl asked why the Queen of Thunder needed this loser. Sire became serious, explaining that there was a target to hunt. At this point, the system notified the hero that the durability of his equipment had reached 0, and it had been destroyed. Hyrcanus, looking at the sword with irritation, realized that it was time to look for new equipment, but he realized that he didn't have the money for it. So the only option left was to hunt for gems. They dropped from monsters extremely rarely, and were used to craft items. Each of them also had special effects, depending on which monster dropped the stone. Hyrcanus came to the conclusion that the gems obtained from the armored monkeys were especially valuable for the creation of equipment. So he summoned his skeletons. Full of determination, Hyrcanus told them that he intended to exterminate every last such monkey. However, after 9 hours he was in despair. Not a single gem had fallen out. Looking at the mountain of bodies of countless monkeys, he was tormented by the question of whether he should have received at least one gem. With a wild expression on his face, he exclaimed that he would try again, hoping that this was the moment when luck would turn in his favor. At that moment, a stranger unexpectedly approached him. The armored warrior called out to him and declared that Hyrcanus must be the same mask of Haho. The hero became wary, trying to understand who this man was who had appeared literally out of nowhere. Looking closer, he noticed that the stranger was wearing a full and obviously expensive set of dragon armor. He was also armed with an orc hero's sword, indicating that his level was at least 70. Hyrcanus then assumed that it was one of those strong players. The stranger called himself Quixote. Then he suddenly started making strange movements. Then, frozen in an awkward pose, he officially challenged the hero to a duel. Hyrcanus was confused and wondered what kind of weirdo was standing in front of him. Quixote explained that he had heard about Mask Haho's growing popularity on WTube, and believed that by defeating him, he too could become famous. Hyrcanus decided that he was just another loser looking for attention, so he turned away and said he was busy. Quixote did not retreat. He shouted, asking to wait, and Hyrcanus, irritated by the lack of gems, was now forced to tolerate this madman. Then the stranger shouted out that he was ready to pay 5,000 gold if the hero agreed to the duel. Hearing this, Hyrcanus instantly changed. Turning around abruptly, he ran up to the player, happily accepted the challenge and called him his favorite client. Quixote considered himself a hero of justice. He believed that his talent always made him the center of attention in any game. At least that's what he thought until he came to Warlord. Nobody paid any attention to him here. All that was heard everywhere was whether people had seen the new Mask Haho video. It drove Quixote crazy. In a rage, he pounded the ground with his fists and shouted that this man was putting him to sleep because they started playing at the same time. He knew that his opponent was lower level, his items were weaker, and he couldn't understand why everyone loved him. At some point, waking up, he realized that he had wandered somewhere. Looking around, I saw a player surrounded by small creatures. Looking closer, he realized it was the Mask of Haho. But a question immediately arose in Quixote's mind about why he was hunting in a closed area. Then a brilliant idea came to Quixote's mind. He decided that he should make a video of his victory over him. Then you can take all the glory for yourself. Now, Quixote took off all his equipment, leaving only his helmet, and offered Hyrcanus 5,000 gold pieces in case of defeat. Hyrcanus was perplexed and indignant as to why this man was undressing if he was going to fight. Quixote explained that he was doing this for the sake of a fair fight, emphasizing that the hero's armor was rumored to have recently broken. Quixote wanted a one-on-one duel, so that no one could say that his victory was achieved only due to his equipment. Hyrcanus still doubted whether he could be taken seriously in this form, but Quixote rushed forward without hesitation, demanding that the chatter stop and the fight begin. The hero dodged the first blow, and remarked that the enemy should listen when he was spoken to. However, he did not pay attention, and continued to attack furiously, forcing Hyrcanus to constantly go on the defensive. Soon, Quixote became enraged and screamed, demanding that his opponent finally start fighting back. Hyrcanus, continuing to dodge, replied that he should let him force it himself. These words made Quixote furious. Then he activated the stimulator skill, dealing a powerful blow. Hyrcanus did not have time to dodge such a sharp blow, so he was thrown aside like a ragdoll. Lying on the ground, he realized that the enemy had just used a warrior ability that briefly increased his speed. Watching his shining aura from afar, Hyrcanus realized that despite his foolish appearance, this player's level was higher than his own. So, a direct fight was a bad idea, so he came up with a plan. When he got up, he saw that Quixote was happy, and it seemed to him that Hyrcanus was finally ready to take the challenge seriously. He demanded to show everything he was capable of, assuring that he intended to prove that he was stronger than the Mask of Haho. Activating the stimulator again, he rushed into the attack. Quixote was already ready to deal him another crushing blow. However, Hyrcanus threw a handful of earth in his face. While the enemy was trying to clear his eyes, the hero knocked the support out from under his feet, causing him to fall. Quixote rolled over and over on the ground several times. He then explained that if the enemy's strength parameter is higher, then this can be covered by the skill. After these words, he delivered a powerful kick straight into his opponent's face. A crushing uppercut followed. This combination of attacks sent Quixote flying into a tree, and he, shaking with anger, accused the hero of cowardice and declared that this was not a skill at all. In response, Hyrcanus grinned and noted that in a fight for life, no one cared about such reasoning. He made it clear that Quixote only lost because he chose to cling to his pride instead of focusing on winning. After that, he activated the skin grafting skill and the armored ape skin item. The system then notified him that the hero's stats had been enhanced by the attributes of these creatures. Quixote thought in horror that if he missed even one blow, he would die. Hyrcanus, with a gloomy expression on his face, reminded him that it was he who had started this battle, and therefore he must now be prepared for its outcome. As Quixote rushed at his opponent, he screamed, begging him to wait. Then he suddenly burst into tears and admitted his defeat. However, Hyrcanus could no longer stop the attack, and his blow was followed by a powerful wave of destruction. Luckily for Quixote, Hyrcanus managed to change the direction of the blow at the last moment and brought it down near his opponent's head. The tree, as well as everything behind it, was completely destroyed. Quixote shook with horror, thinking that it was so scary that he almost forgot that he was in a game. Then Hyrcanus laughed and demanded that he already give the promised 5,000 gold pieces. He added that he was sure that his opponent would be much happier to resolve everything peacefully than to leave the game for 2 days. Taking off his helmet, Quixote exclaimed that Mask Haho was an amazing person. He stated that his opponent was incredibly strong and impressive, which only made Hyrcanus frown, wondering what had gotten into him. The blonde admitted defeat and handed over 5,000 gold pieces. He also gave the hero his sword. Raising the weapon in his hands, Hyrcanus realized that it was the legendary sword of the orc hero. Hyrcanus estimated that such an item would cost no less than 15,000 gold at auction. However, he tried to remain calm and asked why Quixote was giving him such a rare thing. He admitted that he was blinded by the thirst for popularity, and all this time made almost no effort to actually become stronger. It was Hyrcanus who helped him understand this, so Quixote asked him to accept the gift, emphasizing that he was worthy of being called his brother. Hyrcanus was stunned by what he saw and doubted whether this was really why he had given him the sword. But he immediately noted that perhaps behind all his stupidity, there was some charisma. Nevertheless, he kicked the blonde and sarcastically asked if he really expected to hear such words from him. Then he told him to get the hell out and ordered his skeletons to deal with the impudent fellow. Later, Quixote, with a swollen face, declared that his full name was Don Quixote and promised to return when he became worthy of the title of brother. Hyrcanus, leaving with his subordinates, heard him shout after him that he would wait for their next meeting. The hero smiled, noting to himself that Quixote seemed to be truly enjoying the game. However, he soon looked at the new sword. Hyrcanus said that now he no longer needed to hunt armored monkeys. This should have been enough to move on to the next task. However, a little later, he suddenly turned to his skeletons and remarked that perhaps it would be worth killing another 100 of these monkeys. He had a feeling that this time something especially valuable would fall out, but his skeletons clearly did not share their master's enthusiasm and unanimously clung to him, assuring him that the sword was enough. Returning and handing over the ordered items, Hyrcanus watched as Mavun counted the spoils. He reported that there were 950 armored monkeys, 104 fanged wolves, and 76 poisonous lizards. He praised the hero, saying that he did an excellent job. Also, thanks to him, the investigation is progressing well. But at the same time, he noticed a strange expression on Hyrcanus's face and asked what caused it. He became embarrassed, apologized, and explained that he was simply thinking about how to spend the money he had earned. Then Mavun warned that the next mission would be especially dangerous. Pointing to the map, he explained that a fighting bear had appeared near the mountain peak. These creatures, according to him, were about 4 meters tall and wore armor similar to humans. Therefore, if Hyrcanus finds out where exactly their armor and weapons come from, it will greatly help in the investigation. Hyrcanus rose from his chair and remarked that, in other words, he was required to defeat the bears and bring back one of their weapons. Mavun asked if he didn't think it was too dangerous to go there alone, since even the guards could barely cope with these creatures one-on-one. But Hyrcanus assured him that he could handle it, and stated that he already knew how to fight fighting bears. Soon he arrived at the foot of the mountain and decided that this was the very place. Then he summoned his skeletons. With anticipation, the hero said that it was time to flex a little. When he opened the auction interface, the system notified him that he could now participate in bidding with other players. Hyrcan decided that the best purchase for his level would be a bone snake set. He acquired the shoulder pad, then the boots, gloves, and helmet from this set. Hyrcanus tried to contain his emotions, but he couldn't. He said that this is what wealth feels like. Gyrcan noted that although he was still a little short of the level of a warbear, with such enhancements he would succeed. But when he turned around, he saw that the skeletons were looking at him with pleading expressions on their faces. Then Hyrcanus admitted that he had forgotten about them and promised to look for something for them. But the system said that he did not have enough funds. The hero became alarmed, realizing that he was already broke again. Turning sheepishly to his companions, he admitted that the money was gone. He immediately noticed that the expressions on the skeletons' faces became ominous. Frightened, Hyrcanus began to justify himself by saying that he had not done it on purpose, and just at that moment wild monsters appeared nearby. Without waiting for a command, the skeletons rushed at them, and Hyrcanus shouted that perhaps they could get more money for killing them. He felt a sense of relief as he watched his skeletons finish off the last of the boars, and thought that they had come at just the right time. After a few moments, the last boar remained. The animal was frightened, and the skeleton looked at him with a creepy expression on his face and licked his sword. Hyrcanus ordered his subordinate creatures to stop wasting time and finish off the boar, noting that he was equipping them on the way. However, suddenly a powerful attack fell upon the boar. Hyrcanus immediately turned around to see who did it, and soon several players appeared from the bushes. They began to demand an explanation, indignantly asking who he was that he dared to hunt here without permission. They stated that this territory belonged to the Apollo Guild. Hyrcanus froze for a moment, looked closely at the players, and concluded that in front of him was just another gang of losers. They introduced themselves. One called himself Li Chang, another Wang Chang, and the last one Il Chang. Together they solemnly declared that they were the great trio of the Apollo Guild, and Hyrcanus only laughed. He then quickly launched several powerful blows in a row, crushing all three. He made it clear that they were just a handful of pathetic types who decided to disturb him. He wondered why so many people were clinging to him lately. Maybe he should see a priest. As he left with his subordinates, he noted that he had simply wasted his time here, while the players remained lying on the ground, trembling with horror. But Wang Chang, gathering his remaining strength, decided that Hyrcanus had dared to raise his hand against their guild, and swore that they would make him regret it. He touched his wristwatch and sent a report of everything that had happened to his superiors. Soon, one man sitting next to the huge tiger asked whether Hyrcanus had really attacked his subordinates. The guild member confirmed this, emphasizing that this was exactly what Wang Chang had said. Then the guild leader threw a gold bar to his companion and ordered that Hyrcan be delivered at any cost. He made it clear that he would make him pay for the disrespect shown to his name. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus admired the view. He realized that he had reached the territory where the fighting bears lived. Then the hero looked at his skeletons. However, he saw that they were again adopting ridiculous poses. Hyrcanus became indignant, hit everyone on the head, and sternly demanded that they stop fooling around. He then stated that their goal would be to hunt a level 70 war bear, which would be fought in 3 stages. He stressed that they needed to prepare for this battle, as victory would give them an advantage over the top 30 guilds. He noted that he did not expect any mistakes from his skeletons, and they immediately raised their hands as a sign that they understood everything. At that moment, a thunderous roar was heard. Hyrcanus took a deep breath, turned around, and noted that as soon as he remembered the sun, a ray of light immediately appeared. A huge fighting bear appeared right in front of them. Then Hyrcanus immediately activated his watch. He instantly equipped himself and was now ready for battle. Hyrcanus confidently stated that he intended to take this quest for himself. Meanwhile, another person who was nearby decided that the Balkis Mountains were in front of him. He hoped that Mask Haho could still be found there, as he had arrived right after watching the video about the monkeys. Then the man sighed heavily and stopped, wondering in despair why he had to drag himself into such a wilderness. He was considered an important person, but in the end he was forced to carry out an assignment to find some newcomer. While shouting that it looked more like a crime, he suddenly heard a noise. The man realized that the king of the wild boars was preparing to attack him. Then he simply drew a magic circle and cast a spell of hellfire on the beast. This spell immediately stopped the ferocious monster, completely incinerating it. This man turned out to be Baptiste Hatch of the Thunder Hunters Guild, who was ranked 5th among all mages in Warlord. He himself hoped that the mask of Haho would appear as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus's battle with the fighting bear continued. Hyrcan remembered that before he returned to the past, he had already encountered this beast with the guild and suffered 6 defeats. Now he understood perfectly well that if he failed again, he would give up leadership in the main quest to others. He reasoned that in order to deliver an effective blow to the bear, he would have to aim at the gaps in its armor and gradually remove it. Thinking that now he had new skills and everything would work out, Hyrcanus noticed how the enraged beast rushed to attack. He smiled and gave the signal to his subordinates to act. The hero himself rushed forward. He expected his new passive skill, leg strength modification, to be extremely useful. But the speed was so great that he simply flew past the enemy. Hyrcanus was stunned as he tried to comprehend what had happened, and the bear and the skeletons watched in amazement as he flew away. Without wasting any time, the war bear attacked the skeletons, and the system reported that they were all destroyed, which enraged Hyrcan. He immediately opened the description of the leg strength modification skill, and shouted that there was a limit to everything. Seeing a stone nearby, he picked up speed and, once again activating acceleration, struck the bear with all his might. However, the speed was so insane that he crashed straight into the beast. He froze in bewilderment, not understanding what this strange guy was doing. At the same time, Hyrcanus even managed to note that the animal's fur was soft to the touch. But the next second, the monster threw him back with force and threw him against a boulder. Lying on the ground, he thought that the strength of his legs was excessive and he could not control it. He still managed to rip off some of the armor from the bear, but Hyrcanus doubted how useful it could be. With such a range of skills, it was almost impossible to land a real blow. Without waiting for his opponent to get up, the fighting bear rushed at him again. Hyrcanus dodged the crushing blow at the last moment. Then he began to concentrate his powers and activated the spell. It was a bone bomb that caused a magical explosion. He created a charge of mana and threw it straight at the beast's face, causing a powerful explosion. But the result was the opposite. The bear only became even more enraged. Hyrcanus began to panic, deciding that this strategy was too complicated and realizing that he would have to abandon direct attacks. He then used mana to restore and resummon the skeletons. He admitted that he had no choice but to fight like a true necromancer. However, he immediately noticed a strong distrust in the eyes of his skeletons, and then Hyrcanus shouted that this time he would do everything properly. Then he summoned a golem. He immediately materialized right out of the ground. The next moment, he charged furiously at the giant fighting bear, but the beast responded to his attack with a powerful blow. Hyrcanus smiled, deciding that he had one last card up his sleeve. He used the hardened skill on his golem, making it much more durable and resilient. After that, he snapped his fingers and ordered his skeletons to attack. They immediately rushed at the bear, while the beast was constrained by the golem's movements. The skeletons managed to land several blows on the bear. However, this only made the monster even more angry. Hyrcanus was sure that it was too early for the bear to get angry, since his main attack was still ahead. He commanded the skeleton mage to end the fight. However, in the end, both the beast and the hero himself were engulfed in the flames of the spell. Hyrcanus could not believe that he had been struck by an ally, and furious, said that he should have waited until he moved away. At that moment, the bear let out a deafening roar, and the system reported that the monster had used the battle cry skill. The beast then quickly rushed at the hero while he was distracted. Hyrcanus took a deep breath and declared that he didn't care about strategy. He believed that brute force and numerical superiority were always the best solution. He threw several bone bombs at the beast, causing an explosion so powerful that it could be seen from afar. His skeletons watched in horror what their master was doing. However, Hyrcanus paid no attention to them and continued to tirelessly bombard the bear with explosions. Some time passed, and the system announced that the warlike bear had been defeated. The ranger's task had been completed. Hyrcanus looked at his trembling hand and thought that it was this bear that his entire guild had previously fought in vain with before the regression. He clenched his fist, realizing that he had now managed to defeat him single-handedly. This meant that everything he believed in turned out to be right. He then walked up to the skeletons and said that they had done a great job and that he could now return to Mavun to continue the main task. Hyrcanus also proclaimed that the extermination of the warrior bear hunt was over. However, when he noticed his skeletons whispering among themselves, claiming that he had won unfairly, Hyrcanus finally lost his temper. Meanwhile, the story moves to a tavern in the western Balkis Mountains. Several warriors were laughing loudly, and Hatch was sitting alone in the corner. The man, on the verge of madness, thought about how he still had not been able to find the Mask of Haho. He realized that he had been combing the mountains for several days, and the man he was looking for was nowhere to be found. To make matters worse, the mask video went viral, meaning the Balkis Mountains would likely be overrun with players in the near future. The magician understood that if he returned without the hero, Lady Syrah would kill him. He decided it was absurd that his mistress had sent him alone to comb the entire mountain in search of one person. Irritated, he began to curse at the guild, and did not immediately notice that his watch was beeping. Only later did he realize that he had been in contact with Syrah. Jumping up from his chair, he began to shake and hasten to justify himself, claiming that his words did not have that meaning. However, she calmly replied that he had worked hard, which confused him. She admitted that the task she had given him was too burdensome, since he was wandering all over the mountainous area alone. But Hatch began to assure Sir that everything was fine, that it was not a problem at all, and asked to be allowed to return to the mission. Then Syrah said that she sent Haley to help. At that very moment, an explosion thundered in the tavern. When the dust settled, visitors saw that a hole had formed in the wall. As Hatch turned around in horror, Seer said that they would now work together to find the Mask of Haho. A girl stepped into the hole in the wall and screamed, calling the magician an idiot. It turned out to be Thunder Princess Haley of the Thunder Hunters Guild, and she stated that it was because of him that she had to come all this way. Hatch froze, realizing that this was one of those who hated him, and he screamed that he hated this rotten world. Meanwhile, Hyrcanus, standing on the mountain, noted that Balkis was becoming an increasingly populated place, and even a camp had already been built. He noted that most players probably realized that this was now the main search area. However, now the hero had to return to Mavun. He rushed forward, jumping from tree to tree. Suddenly, he noticed 3 people moving towards him. Looking closer, he realized that their clothes resembled the outfits of those same 3 guys from Apollo whom he had met earlier. Hyrcanus decided that perhaps this was their attempt to avenge their friends. Then the hero ordered them to attack immediately, but he noticed that they ran past without paying the slightest attention to him. The hero turned around in confusion, trying to understand what was happening, but the strangers only shouted out a request for help. Hyrcanus thought with puzzlement that he had done nothing. A moment later, the trio was attacked by someone's powerful spell, and the hero's face was damaged by a random blow. Turning around, he saw 2 new opponents. It was Thunder Princess Haley and the magician Hatch. Noticing the emblems on their clothes, Hyrcan immediately realized that they were members of the Thunder Hunters Guild. However, he was immediately struck by the tip of a sword aimed straight at him. Haley demanded to know if he was the same Mask of Haho from the video. The hero remembered that Haley held the position of second in command in the guild. She was considered a zealous hysteric, ready to go through hell at Sire's command. The second man was a third-level mage, known by the nickname Ballista. He was a genius who had never failed to achieve his goal. He also remembered that before his regression, they were the ones who had been the biggest threat to him, and he had never expected to meet them here. However, he decided that if they were looking for the Haho mask, then it was probably about recruiting into the guild. Although deep down he would have loved to kill them both, he knew full well that it was impossible now. So he climbed down from the tree, and pretending to be a fool, he pretended that he didn't even know who it was. He chuckled to himself and decided to continue the comedy, since without evidence they couldn't do anything anyway. However, Haley suddenly approached him with a gloomy expression on her face, and stated that he was lying. She explained that it was simply impossible to cross the Balkas Mountains without hearing about the Mask of Haho. She emphasized that the cloak that the main character was wearing reminded her very much of the Haho mask. Then the magician intervened and ordered the argument to stop, stating that this was not the issue at all. He pointed his finger at the Thunder Princess's forehead and shouted that the real problem was her. He began to be heatedly indignant that she had destroyed the tavern and killed people just because she considered them suspicious. Now he wanted to know how she was going to make up for what she had done, because the whole area knew about their guild, and it was impossible to deny what had happened. Hyrcanus watched this dispute with amazement, wondering if they had not always been like this. Eventually, Haley, clearly irritated, muttered an apology. Hatch, looking after her, asked what kind of ridiculous behavior this was, and then turned to the protagonist, apologizing for his partner. Hyrcanus breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he had escaped trouble, but he did not notice how someone rushed towards him. It was only when a fist appeared in front of his face that he noticed the approaching attack. However, there was no time left to react, and the Thunder Princess's blow threw him straight onto the rock. Hatch grabbed Haley, asking why she hit him, and the girl replied that she thought he would at least try to dodge. Hyrcanus did not believe what was happening. It turned out that they had just attacked an innocent player who wasn't even defending himself. Then he demonstratively adjusted his glasses and solemnly announced that he was officially filing a complaint. The magician was horrified and hastened to apologize, assuring that they would compensate for the damage, begging them to forget about what happened. Hatch then gave the hero a bag of gold coins. Hyrcanus noted that since he was offered 1,000 gold pieces as an apology, he agreed to hush up the incident. Hatch let out a sigh of relief and thanked him, then grabbed Haley's hand and pulled her away. Hyrcanus knew he looked pathetic, but provoking them would mean disaster, so I decided that it was better to endure it for now. Hatch was still scolding his partner, accusing her of causing trouble every time, and for a large guild it was important to maintain an image. Then Haley, slightly puzzled, asked if people weren't supposed to instinctively dodge a blow. Hatch couldn't resist asking if she was seriously trying to blame the hero for not dodging. She replied that it wasn't that at all. It was just that the guy looked like he saw the blow but decided not to move. Then the magician asked her to shut up. In response, she told him to shut up himself and called him a loser. Meanwhile, the protagonist returned to Mavun's house and gave him part of the bear warrior's armor. The man said it was expected and confirmed that something strange was clearly happening in the mountains. He thanked the hero and suddenly noticed that Hyrcanus's hands were shaking and asked if everything was okay with him. Then Mavun took out the chest and put it on the table. Opening it, he asked Hyrcanus to choose one item. He explained that while he was in the Balkas Mountains, he marked the lairs of monsters on the map. Hyrcanus immediately realized that they were talking about treasures. The hero became inspired, imagining what rare items could be found there. However, just as he was about to extend his hand, Muan suddenly added that he would like to ask for a favor. Hyrcanus turned away in irritation, thinking that he knew it all. No one would give something like that for free. Mavun explained that armed monsters had begun to appear outside the Balkas Mountains, and asked him to explore new places. Gherkin reluctantly agreed, took the map and asked where the target was, and the man replied that it was the Parung Forest. The hero grimaced when he heard this, and Mavun asked if he had anything to say. However, Hyrcanus merely waved it off. He sighed heavily as he stepped outside. Parung Forest was a level 90 hunter zone, meaning he would have to level up along the way. He decided that the ideal place for this now was the Sura Canyon, where the 75th level demons lived. He even cheered up, deciding that since he was able to defeat the bear warrior, he could also deal with the demon. But after taking a few steps, he suddenly froze. Gherkin ahead of Matador Cheba. Cheb, in turn, was surprised by their meeting and asked Hyrcanus what he was doing here. Meanwhile, Hatch, almost in tears, contacted Lady Sarah. The magician claimed that he was not able to work with this abnormal woman. Hatch began to justify himself by saying that he had not refused the mission at all, but he had heard that the Red Bulls Guild had already captured Sura Canyon, so he suggested focusing on the main quest. He asked why it was necessary to persuade a guy who initially did not want to join the guild. Then Sire thought for a moment and ordered the hunt for the Mask of Haho to be stopped, announcing that the guild would now focus on the main mission. Their call ended shortly after that. When the connection was lost, Sire leaned back in her chair. She smiled and thought that the strong are always drawn to the strong. That was why she wanted to know how long Maskahaho could continue to escape. Even before the protagonist met Cheb, he found himself in the Parung forest and encountered a level 75 demonic goat. However, he overcame him without any particular difficulties. As a result, the main character was able to rise 2 levels at once. He was delighted and noted to himself that he had finally reached level 62 and everything was going well. While he was discussing with the skeletons about the need to level up a little more, several players were watching him from afar. Soon they were all surprised to learn that it was the mask of Haho in front of them. A few moments later they surrounded Hyrcanus, hugging and trying to kiss him. This made the hero furious. He quickly rushed away and ordered the strangers to leave him alone. As he ran, the hero thought about why everything was exactly like this. All this happened thanks to the success of his video of the battle against the angry bear warrior, which brought a real jackpot. However, Hyrcanus understood that this was not good. Now he was constantly being watched, and hunting was becoming almost impossible. He just wanted to focus on hunting, but he was not allowed to do so. So he gathered his skeletons and decided to change the plan. They would head to the center of the Sura Canyon, where it would be harder to keep track of him. However, suddenly the hero ran into Cheb. As soon as Hyrcanus saw him, he immediately stopped. Cheb smiled and noted that it had been a long time since he had last seen the hero. But Hyrcanus only grimaced again, not understanding where this guy came from again. Cheb patted him on the back and asked if he was the same guy from the newcomer's location. At the same time, he noted that the speed of Hyrcan's leveling up is impressive, because just a few months ago he was in the starting location. Then Hyrcan asked Cheb why he was here, since the Sura Canyon was a place where rankers of his level usually didn't come. In response, Cheb laughed and explained that the day before, his guild, the Red Bulls, had decided to lay claim to the canyon. Therefore, they needed a base nearby to complete the main quest. Cheb, inspired, indicated that he had come here in the hope of meeting the Mask of Haho. He asked if the hero had seen the video of Mask Haho fighting the bear warrior, as he really wanted to meet him. Cheb then asked if the hero was interested in this super newcomer. Without thinking, Hyrcanus rushed away with the skeletons, shouting apologies to Cheb and saying that he didn't even know who this Mask of Haho was. After running for some time, he stopped and, overcome with rage, wondered why everyone was chasing him. He realized that he was being watched by 2 entire guilds, Sir of the Thunder Hunters, and now Cheb of the Red Bulls. Hyrcan began to feel that at this rate he would have to forget about the main quest, because leveling up was becoming impossible. Then he remembered the cards he had received from Mr. Mavoon. As soon as he grabbed one of them, he was sure that there was definitely a rare dungeon somewhere around here. Without thinking twice, he saw a dungeon mark on the map. Approaching the waterfall, he decided that rare dungeons are usually hidden in hard-to-reach places, and although it won't be easy to get something valuable, it's worth the risk. Taking a deep breath, Hyrcanus dove into the lake with the skeletons. The system immediately notified that breathing underwater was limited, and the available time was only 20 seconds. Hyrcanus mused that if Mr. Wong's map was correct, the dungeon should be very close. As he continued to swim, and time was quickly running out underwater, he knew whether he would be able to reach his destination in time. When there was only 1 second left, the hero was sure that there was very little time left. Eventually, he managed to reach his goal and emerged. The system reported that he had entered the dungeon. Hyrcanus was amazed by his surroundings. He noted to himself that if people were a problem, he needed to hunt where they weren't. As they walked, the hero wondered what kind of monsters lived here, and whether there would be any strong ones among them, since this was a secret place. Suddenly he heard a strange sound. Suddenly a creature with brightly glowing eyes appeared in front of him. The main character froze in place in bewilderment. Then suddenly Hyrcanus became furious, shouting that he didn't come here for the stupid slime. However, he was shocked to see that the creature was emitting fire from its body. He wondered if this dungeon was a habitat for monsters with attributes. These monsters are some of the rarest in the world of Warlord. Their drops are used to create equipment and are incredibly valuable. This greatly inspired the hero, and he realized that he could get rich by hunting them. Without thinking, he ordered his skeletons to destroy all the elemental monsters. The creature, frightened, let out a loud cry, and immediately the ground beneath their feet began to shake. Hyrcanus became worried, wondering what it could be. Suddenly, a massive level 70 fire salamander appeared in front of them. The main character couldn't believe his eyes. Salamander immediately began to concentrate his fire and fired it towards Hyrcan, forcing him to dodge. Hyrcanus watched the attack and was surprised, not expecting such a start to the battle. He stood up and realized that there was no choice. If things continued like this, the situation would become extremely difficult. So, he decided to use his new powers. Hyrcan activated the Helm of Madness ability on the Bone Warrior, then used bone armor. He then equipped the Black Orc skull to strengthen his skeleton. Thus, he completed the summoning of the Skeleton Knight. This frightened both the huge salamander and the small creature. The skeleton knight pointed his sword towards his enemy, and suddenly his silhouette began to ripple. In the blink of an eye, he completely cut the fire salamander apart. After this, the skeleton again stood in a fighting stance, ready to fight off the next opponents. Hyrcanus was delighted, and thought that the skeleton knight was fully prepared for battle. A flock of salamanders began a decisive offensive towards Hyrcanus, hoping to break his resistance. It was an unequal fight against the crowd, but Hyrcanus knew perfectly well that he would emerge from this battle as the winner. As they got closer, the salamanders began to hiss aggressively, preparing to unleash their fiery attack on him. With a determined cry, Hyrcanus ordered the skeleton knight to rush forward and deal with these worms. Within moments, he was cutting all his opponents into pieces, leaving them no chance. The system notified him that he had destroyed the salamanders and received a lot of experience points. Immediately after this, the skeleton knight began to shine and attract the attention of his colleagues who had not yet reached such heights. Gherkin was genuinely happy with his incredible auto-farming capabilities, since now the costs had been cut. After he upgraded his skeleton's skills, they were able to hunt alone. Considering the rather high cost of salamander essence, he could easily compensate for the leveling. Gherkin knew he had to work this way until he had leveled up all the skeletons in his group. He recommended that they continue like this until they defeat the boss and head to Perung Forest. However, after just an hour he was faced with serious problems, as everything could not go so easily. The system said that he had discovered a dungeon instance called the Throne Room and invited him to enter. It is impossible to simply crawl out of such dungeons, so going there was associated with serious risks to life. If he lost, he would lose access to the game for 2 days, which his opponents could easily use to get around him. However, there were no normal places to farm in the area, so there really was no choice at all. Hyrcanus understood that in such a situation he had no choice but to trust completely to luck and go inside. With a determined step, he entered the dungeon of the throne room, which at first seemed rather empty and ominous. Hyrcanus looked around, realizing that, apparently, this was some kind of abandoned temple with a bunch of stone knights. He noticed a large number of blade marks and realized that things would soon get hot here. After a while, he suddenly stopped, noticing something that immediately caught his attention. On the throne sat a huge body, which, however, had no head, but it could not be called dead. After a few moments, the giant armor began to move and a fire appeared above the place of his head. Hyrcanus realized that a quick evacuation was needed, and ordered the skeletons to take cover as quickly as possible. However, after just one moment, the mighty revived monster immediately cut off the heads of all of Hyrcanus's soldiers. Hyrcan received a notification that his skeletons had taken too much damage and were destroyed. Hyrcanus was angry, realizing that he had been careless and that he had paid dearly for this mistake. On the other hand, no one knew that such a powerful creature as a level 80th Knight Spirit would be here. It was a monster whose artificial intelligence was excessively good, making it extremely difficult to fight. In a past life, the main character had already encountered something similar, and then he was at about the same level as now. He also came there with his guild, but it all ended in a cruel failure without a single chance. At that time, he could only retreat, but now this was an unaffordable luxury for him. Gritting his teeth, he quickly tried to think of what he could do to defeat this enemy. Quickly jumping to the side, he again summoned his skeletons, who still felt neither fear nor pain. Immediately after this, he ordered them to rush forward and attack with full force from the very beginning. The Knight's spirit grabbed his sword again and rushed forward, cutting off the head of the most careless skeleton. Hyrcanus called his opponent a pathetic bastard and rushed into the attack, thinking that he had a window to deal damage. Teaming up with the strongest and coolest skeleton, they launched a powerful attack, but the Knight's spirit was distracted to block it. Meanwhile, one of the skeletons quickly penetrated the enemy's rear and delivered a powerful blow directly to his unprotected back. The visible effect was not long in coming, and the skeleton looked cautiously at his opponent, awaiting further orders. Hyrcanus told his skeleton not to delay and to get out of there quickly while he still had the chance. After a while, there was a powerful explosion that threw the skeleton knight and Hyrcan aside. The system notified Hyrcan that the skeleton warrior had been destroyed, and the protagonist realized that the blow to the heart was not critical. The enemy stood up straight proudly, showing everyone that he had not received a single scratch. Hyrcanus tried to figure out what he could do here, since ordinary skeletons and golems were clearly of no help here. For a few moments, he was transported back to his past when his former comrade suddenly called out to him, asking if he had gone crazy. At that moment, he was asked why he was climbing on a monster 4 times his size. Hyrcanus said that he did not think about such things, but if he needed some clever reason, he could come up with one. He grinned and said that he had forbidden himself to eat until he had given that scoundrel a good beating. His comrade looked at him with genuine incomprehension and asked him if he had really been so stupid and narrow-minded. Hyrcanus rushed forward, realizing that thinking through battle strategy had never been his strong point. He understood that if the crits didn't work, he would simply hit with regular attacks until the enemy lost his pulse. This strategy was very straightforward, but it worked, which meant you just had to keep going, dodging along the way. The knight's spirit gradually lost patience and tried to think of new ways to attack his opponent. Hyrcanus carefully noted that his opponent was accelerating with each passing minute, so he needed to finish faster. At a certain point, it became so difficult to dodge that he even received a serious injury. However, in reality, this was all a secret plan that was initiated in order to lure the enemy into a trap. The skeleton knight followed another command and quickly jumped behind his opponent to deliver a powerful blow. A moment later, the skeleton warrior instantly cut off the enemy's hand, causing it to fly several dozen meters away. Immediately after this, the skeleton warrior jumped towards his master, preparing to carry out his next command. Meanwhile, the knight's spirit still maintained stoic indifference and looked at his opponents with a cold gaze. Hyrcanus smiled and said that he would not be able to eat until he finished him off, so he had no other choice. The scene moved to a village near the Sura Canyon. Cheb and Yel walked around the local camp, noting that he lived his life no matter what. Yel said that they were in charge of setting up this camp, so there was nothing to worry about. Cheb said that in that case even the Mask of Haho could drop in here, but Yel did not share his enthusiasm. She told him that he was already obsessed with this guy, even though he was just a low-level monster hunter. Cheb said that for them these monsters were low-level, but for Masky it was different. Cheb claimed that in a game where you feel all the pain, only madmen and natural-born warriors would challenge such monsters. In his opinion, Hyrcanus was a hybrid of these two entities, which meant that he was sure to succeed. However, it was not without reason that the knight's spirit continued to stand motionless, even after such a serious injury. After some time, his arm began to rapidly regenerate, so the pace of the battle had to be accelerated. Hyrcanus asked him whether even the loss of his hand was really a mere trifle for him, unworthy of attention. He found this factor quite irritating, but he caught his breath to continue the fight. After that, he told his skeletons to rush into battle with him, and quickly ran the distance. The knight's spirit gradually restored his arm to a certain limit, and decided to use a different tactic. Taking a few steps towards his enemies, he swung his sword sharply and hit the ground, creating cracks. A few moments later, the ground beneath the heroes flew apart, scattering the heroes along the way. Hyrcanus, however, landed softly on his knees, realizing that they were trying to bury him alive in this temple. After that, he and his comrade rushed forward, jumping away from the stones flying through the air. They began to spin around him, simultaneously striking his body with increasing speed. Hyrcan realized that his plan was working perfectly, and he just needed to keep dealing damage as quickly as possible. In that case, victory would not have been long in coming, and the knight's spirit would have fallen by his hand very soon. However, it was not worth thinking that the knight's spirit had no countermeasures to counter the hero's tactics. This time it became even more fiery, creating a special protective barrier. Hyrcanus realized that his opponent had become even stronger, despite the fact that he had already inflicted a lot of damage on him. Gradually, the sparks of fire began to form into full-fledged fire projectiles, and Hyrcanus was forced to repel them. Hyrcanus realized that this enemy's attack pattern had changed significantly, as if it had evolved. He rushed forward in irritation and struck him again, this time in the head area, with the aim of decapitating him. Immediately after this, he turned to his skeleton and said that it was time to move on to the next step. However, a moment later, the knight delivered a swift crossblow straight at Hyrcanus's unprotected body. After some time, a powerful explosion was heard, which threw the main character back. Hyrcanus felt incredible pain, realizing that he had been too focused on controlling the skeletons. The situation quickly became critical, as the knight's spirit prepared to deliver the finishing blow. However, at the last moment, the skeleton knight rushed forward to take the full blow, protecting his master. Hyrcan looked at his comrade in shock, realizing that he had taken too much damage and would be destroyed. Finally, the skeleton knight gave him a gesture of approval, letting him know that he was proud of him. A few moments later, his body dissolved, causing Hyrcanus to feel his heart skip a beat. After that, he immediately rushed into battle, using the bone bomb skill on his opponent. The knight's spirit once again walked forward calmly, not paying attention to the explosions that constantly appeared around him. Hyrcanus closed the distance and blocked all attacks from his opponent. Hyrcanus realized that there was still very little time left, and his plan would finally be carried out to the end. The bone bomb was used again, and small shards flew towards the body of the enemy knight. After this, the shards came together and a powerful explosion occurred, which certainly caused a lot of damage. Hyrcanus realized that this was still not enough, and that he would have to deal at least one more such blow. Before he could think of his next move, the knight's spirit rushed forward, seriously crippled. Hyrcanus was prepared for this, and asked if the knight's spirit knew a very interesting detail of this world. Spirit monsters were not at all afraid of magic damage, and so he did not waste the bone bomb for nothing. The whole point was that he added skeletal fragments to each of them to deceive his enemy. However, now it's time to use your signature skill to put an end to this fight. The maximum summon of skeletons immediately began to work, and Hirkan's new army immobilized its target. Hyrcanus rushed forward, saying that it was time to end this protracted battle. The skeletons prevented our hero's target from moving, forcing him to take a lot of damage. Hyrcanus lunged forward with his sword, feeling the aura of the place gradually become calmer. The system informed him that he had finally managed to defeat the Spirit Knight after an intense battle. Immediately after this, he was showered with awards, titles, and new levels that would be very useful to him. Hyrcanus recalled the words of his comrades, who said that he had dragged them into this meat grinder by signing the death sentence. Turning around, he saw how the risen skeletons were gradually patching up their wounded and looking around. The skeleton knight looked up at Hyrcan again and gave him an approving gesture. Hyrcanus smiled, realizing that the situation now was strikingly different from the one he had once been in. Addressing his skeletons, he said that they had done an excellent job and he was proud of them. The skeletons immediately began to admire him, but he was more interested in why they weren't teleported back. He hoped that this didn't mean there was another boss in this room that he would have to fight. However, after a while, he turned around in horror after the landscape of this temple suddenly began to change rapidly. However, fortunately, a room containing powerful rewards simply appeared in front of him. Hyrcanus immediately rushed forward, thanking all the gods that he had finally received a reward for his persistent and long efforts. He immediately wondered what amazing rewards he could receive, but now he was ready for anything. After a while, he looked at a rather tattered book, which at first glance did not seem to have any value. Hyrcanus realized that he had been given one of the main plot items, but he had read it many times and remembered it by heart. He wondered why such trash was being offered in this awards room. However, after some time he discovered something very interesting, and his face immediately changed. After some time, he finally moved to the Parung Forest, which was Hyrcanus's next target. He looked around the landscape carefully, indicating that he had leveled up enough and was ready to continue on. Turning towards the skeletons, he said that it was time to move forward and prepare for battle. The skeletons responded to this command with a funny dance and a demonstration of their dazzling appearance. Hyrcanus was impressed by their enthusiasm and wondered why they were so happy. However, their joy turned out to be quite justified if you think about what our hero found in the awards room. He gained an advanced skill that allows him to equip equipment to summoned creatures. Now he could upgrade skeletons regardless of his level, although it cost him a pretty penny. After this, he ordered his skeletons to try to justify his expenses, otherwise they would be in trouble. Suddenly, unknown people came out of the shadows and said that they were very impressed by what they saw. Continuing to approach him menacingly, they talked about how the rumors that had begun to spread seemed to be true. One of them smiled maliciously, saying that if he knew who was standing in front of him, he should have been trembling with horror. These young men said that the main credo of their lives was romance, for which they were ready to die. Striking epic poses, they introduced themselves as romantic bandits, or the R2 family. Hyrcanus looked at them with genuine bewilderment, realizing that it was impossible to find anyone normal in this game.